Hang on.
I just send it over. I'll mute myself on both of them just so you know. And let me know if I'm a little quiet.
No, you're fine. I'm going live now, by the way, on Kick and the other platforms. Here, I'll post them in the general so you have my Kick.
Okay, and you go ahead and.
Hello, everyone. I'm joined today with GameDiviner, also known as Paolo Munoz. How are you doing today?
Thanks. You're doing really great, Kevin.
All right. Well, hey, obviously you were a major player in GamerGate. Do you want to tell us about your GamerGate story?
Well, just starting off, actually, it's much earlier than that because, for my part, at least, I'm on the developer end, and I don't think people really talked about this end very much. The narrative from the developer end is very interesting because, from my perspective, there was a certain story that everyone was told that if you play the game, basically the game being you network with people, you go on the indie dev hashtag, you go on the forums, you go to Gamasutra, and you talk to the right people, and if your game is good enough, then the press will cover it. Supposedly, it was supposedly a game of meritocracy where the best games are always brought to the top, right? But that was basically the experience I had right prior before the big reveal in August 14, when all of a sudden you find out that most of the games that people are covering are because they're all friends with each other, they're lovers with each other, they roommates with each other, and all sorts of non-disclosed relationships. And basically, this was an era where everyone was desperate for any oxygen for anything that they could make. It still is actually nowadays, but just perspective is people would do ridiculous antics all over either GDC or a whole bunch of other places just so that people would talk about them in the gaming press. And if I don't know if you remember this old company named Gamecock, but they'd put on like stupid hats and run around all over the place during like these big events just so that the press would talk about their stuff. I mean, it was kind of inane and immature, and eventually like no one really liked the games, but the press would cover them, and it gave them at least a bit of oxygen. So everyone was very desperate for just a little bit of coverage, and to find out that all the reasons why certain developers get coverage is because they're known completely totally blows everything out. In fact, like the other thing that was also people don't talk about is that for a whole bunch of awards like IGF, Indiecade, and a whole bunch of others had undisclosed relationships between the judges and the actual people who won the awards. One thing, I don't know if you know this one, Kevin. There's a story of Edmund McMillan, the one who made Super Meat Boy and a few others.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, he actually did a stream, and he actually talked addressing the GamerGators, saying things like that when the IGF came around and Super Meat Boy was up for an award, the panel judges decided not to give him an award, not because his game didn't deserve technical merit or anything like that, but because somebody else needs the press so that they can make, they're fine, they've had enough press already, therefore someone else deserves the award so that they can get they can get more press for their game. I believe the game was called Monaco, and he at that time Edmund McMillan could not the other developer, the programmer, could not afford his asthma medicine. Like they were just that desperate, and they really did not make as much money from Xbox as people think. And what ended up happening was that when they sold the game on Steam, that's what actually helped them support their families. But Edmund said that part of the reason he wasn't covered was because of this inner clique of people deciding who are the winners, who are the losers, who are going to, show their stuff as worthy of being presented by the press. And you have an extra in if you're one of the clique. And one of the things people don't know, like as I was watching, and this is even before GG, I was always wondering things like, why in the world are these certain people being covered all the time? Like, for instance, like the one who always comes up is Zoe Quinn. Like, if I don't know if you know this, but there was an article earlier in 2014 covering her because she put a RFID chip in her hand. It's like, what's so special about someone you putting a RFID chip in their hand? Just like I don't know if you know, like pets, you can put a pet so you can find whose pet it belongs to. she put like the whole reason why it was gaming related is because it had Deus Ex as a source code, and like you later find out the only reason that it was covered in the first place is because Patricia Hernandez did it, and later on I edited the article after GG to say, oh yeah, I'm one of her friends. But the fact that you gave her just that amount of spotlight for no other reason than the fact that she decided to be an alt girl and decided to get some chips in her hand shows just how rigged the game is. And so, as a whole bunch of indie developers, I mean, I was the years leading up to GG, I would see people throw fortunes at trying to get their games out there. They'd ruin their lives, put down like mortgages with the idea that your game, if it's good enough, would be seen by the press and talked by the press. And it turns out it's a rigged game. And that was the kind of injustice that I saw on the part of developers. Even more so, was that when people started talking about the lack of integrity in journalists, I saw blacklists being run around the developer circle saying, if you talk about this, we are not going to cover you whatsoever. You do not deserve to be covered because you're talking about our integrity. Like, how dare you? And I was watching that, and just the level of anger of seeing that, because you like what made it even more ridiculous was that this was the whole of them was a clique. All of them covered each other. It wasn't like you had one gaming outlet or two of them among the big ones that would compete and say, oh yeah, this one's a really bad rag, but we're the good ones. No, they all consolidated together as one group, which made it even more ridiculous. And later on we found out they were part of the Game Journal Pros list. So from the aspect of the developer, like, that's what precluded GamerGate, because GamerGate started at least in August 27th, but the whole scandal of how these journalists were covering for each other started in August 14.
Just a heads up, your mic is coming through for me a little bit staticky. I'm gonna see if it's playing on the VOD that way. A bit staticky.
All right, no problem. I'll just wait for a second. Covering for each other started in August.
It is coming through staticky for the viewers too.
All right.
Just a little bit. It's not super bad, but
let me see if I can boost my mic or something. Maybe I need to replace my headset. Input volume. How about now?
oh, that's way better. That's way better.
Okay, it's a lot more sensitive, so a lot more pickup will happen, and so you'll hear my kids in the background.
Okay, there's still a little bit of a static, but I think it's probably fine.
Okay, I'll be sure to talk a little louder too.
All right, so obviously, well, that's not using the word obviously. The games press has a lot of friends with, they're friends with developers, especially indie developers. It's a very incestuous scene. Everyone knows each other. Everybody goes to the same parties, and if you're not in the group, your perception is you're basically screwed. You're not going to get your game noticed by these people. They're not going to talk about you. They're not going to give you positive coverage. You're not going to be in the news regularly. You're just kind of screwed.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, and if you don't happen to be in the central areas of the press, such as Toronto, Calgary, Boston, and San Francisco, there's no chance for you to really be covered by the press themselves, unless by some miracle you're able to really do something that really shines. But even then, you have really no hope. And I think that's really the major obstacle that people were talking about. And so, like, at least on my part, that was where it started. And the fact that the press would refuse to talk about their own ethical problems, that they actually were beginning to shut down any discussion of it, both on YouTube, Reddit, 4chan, and on, and if anyone dared to speak out about it, they start getting put on a blacklist and a block list. People started, what most of the time, the whole indie dev community were based around a hashtag. And then you notice that a whole bunch of the people were just were blocking you. The big accounts that would cover you, or at least would talk to you, you'd suddenly be in a block list. So how in the world would anyone discover you if you're all of a sudden blocked by half the industry? So that was the problem. That was even before GamerGate. That no one really that really was the issue. In a sense, what GamerGate helped was that it actually got that story out. That most people were mostly focused on the journalistic ethic issue, But for developers, this was a huge problem. Not only the fact, but one of the major contributors to the issue was Leigh Alexander, who was the editor of Gamasutra, and most people don't understand that Gamasutra is the central place where people find jobs in the industry.
Oh, by the
So,
way, it's still coming through super staticky. Would it be better if we? I care more about the book than the video, so like I'm fine with proceeding. But anyone who's watching is getting like a horrible experience right now. Did
yeah, no
you
problem. Let me
want to
switch
try
over.
on
Let
our?
me try another device. Give me a second.
Okay.
I might try my cell phone to see if it actually has a better mic than my gaming mic. One moment. I'm going to drop out really quick. Hold on.
Sorry about the low quality VOD, everybody. But who cares? It's for the book. But I care. I do care about the quality of the video too. But we put in the chat tech issues. Back soon. We want to clear up the audio for everyone. Welcome back.
All right, let me just check something here.
Okay, there we go. I think that's better.
All right. Well, you're on speaker. Okay, let me know how I come across now.
Much better. Okay. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. It's actually my fault. I'll go to another room because it's on speakerphone. Hold on. Okay. Well, anyway, as I was saying, like one of the major issues is that one of the people involved in this whole mess was the editor in chief of Gamasutra, or the editor in was it? She was not editor in chief. She was something called like editor at large or something like that. But in either case, she was in charge of Gamasutra, which is the major hub for getting a job. So basically, you're screwed if you talked about how the press was actually corrupt.
Do you think that
So good.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Do you think that your personal career as an indie developer and an aspiring indie developer was harmed greatly by this collusion and corruption?
Well, that's a pretty difficult one to quantify. I mean, for myself, whenever anyone has ever asked, like, "Hey, do you want to team up and make a game?" At least in the last 9 years, I've always told them, like, "Look, you guys are much younger than me, and most of them are young people, and I'm an old fogey right now. I have a family, and I always, my whole career has been IT. I've always aspired to be an independent game developer. I made a couple back in the big Flash era, but I always wanted to make a big Steam game. And whenever people have approached me at post GamerGate about it, I always say, "Hey, look, I was involved in GamerGate." And if they don't know what it is, there are people who don't, which is kind of funny. I would tell them like, "Hey, look, this is something that if people discover that I'm part of it, they could outright cancel it. And I don't want to ruin or jeopardize any project you guys are a part of because I'm on it." And if people say like, "Oh, you're being a little paranoid about it," I mean, they still go after Mark Kern. They went after Troy Lovett. Troy was the lead developer of Hogwarts Legacy. They can still go after him. These people are bigger names than I will ever be.
They
Well,
destroyed Tim Surrey's life, probably. Well, they
yeah,
severely tried to, at least.
well, it ruined his project at least, and pulled all the sponsors pulled out. And for people who don't know that one I believe is the Last Night, which is like it was a pixel cyberpunk looking game. It's still on Steam if you want to wishlist it. But everyone who was supposed to help him and sponsor it pulled out.
And that was
Um,
because Zoe Quinn tried to cancel him,
right.
basically.
And so like who am I? I'm like really small potatoes compared to these guys. So I already know that if anyone tries to go with me about this thing, and I could possibly be a major liability to anything that goes on. So I mean, like, does it damage my career? Well, it was always something I aspired to dream about and do. At the same time, I still do. I don't know if I have the talent, to be honest, to actually pull off anything that would be worthwhile or even worth even be taking a look at. So I mean, to be fair to be everyone else, yeah. I mean, I don't think I'm that talented. So I mean, in my opinion, I mean, I still want to make games. I still want to try to make games, but at the same time, I don't think that it really would have affected me that much yet. But I don't know how I'm going to quantify that if I do something that's worth press, and all of a sudden they realize that the person who made it was a GamerGater. That's going to be an interesting day.
Well, won't won't some of these people argue that, well, look, if you support a Gamergate or if you're not down with our clique, then you're not a progressive. You don't share our values. We don't really want you in our industry. You know what? You can go kick sand because we're not going to give you any attention because you don't stand for the values that we think are important for gaming.
Dude, I think that's where it's actually kind of funny. And this is something I've been joking with a lot of people. A lot of people are really mad about how the game industry is, lot less sexy, and it's a lot more reserved. It's a lot more cautious about what they put online. And I think that it's an opportunity for people to be on the fringes to push the envelope, and that basically opens a market for people like myself, who, even if I don't share their values, I mean, the fact that there's a market gap, it means that there's a place for me, that I can do something and push the envelope that they're unwilling to do so because they have way too much money. And the indies, I mean, one of the big problems we had, at least back 10 years ago, was that the indies couldn't even get on Steam, unless you had enough like press or something behind you to actually give you that umph and to get into the Steam store. Now the gateway to get into Steam is simply $100, and the willingness to just simply say, "Hey, I'm out there." I mean, the downside is discoverability is very difficult in Steam, but the upside is that anyone has a shot now. I mean, anyone who has $100. I mean, that could be exorbitant in certain parts of the world, but at least more people have a shot to try it out and to see if their ideas take off. And for all you know, they're the next Vampire Survivors. So that's where it's a lot more fair right now in terms of discoverability. And now we're no longer bottlenecked with the press. You have people who actually play video games, with those let's players and streamers and everyone else who actually play video games. There's a chance that you can actually be discovered by them, and then you can go viral that way. You're no longer bottlenecked in the terms of the press. So for myself, like, yeah, even if the San Francisco, you know, to Silicon Valley or Calgary or all these other places that are quote unquote progressive hubs of whatever they want to make, and I happen to make something, I'm not as stupid as making. I really hate the Christian video games like Bible Man or The Left Behind. I think those are equally ridiculous and equally stupid. I mean, like, let's just say I try to make something like that. Well, I could find a market. But I really think those are really dumb games in themselves. Anyway, I mean, my opinion is anyone who tries to push their politics ideology through the video game really do more damage to themselves than anything else, and they come up with a really bad game at the same time. I think that's being proven more and more nowadays.
I do want to touch upon that, but first, isn't it kind of natural for any industry to sort of have like some degree of corruption and collusion with it? Like if you're a business person and you know the right people, you shake their right hands, you went to college with the right person, you have a much easier time in life being successful than someone who doesn't have those connections, and that's just sort of like a natural part of any human civilization.
I would say so. I mean, like, to some degree, yes. I would say that actually is known. For instance, anyone going to Hollywood should know that there are at least some shaky deals that always go in the background. And before the big Me Too thing, that there are Harvey Weinsteins out there who will prey upon people, women specifically, to get their way, so that they would get the right places and the right roles. I mean, the entertainment industry has always had that background. The problem I always had with, at least with video games, is that there was an idea that was pushed around. I don't know how. I would imagine everyone felt that way. That the games kind of a way speak for themselves. They are a meritocracy in and of themselves. And when you play video games, they are based on mostly skill. And so the idea that this is a new and open playing where it's more equal. At least it was based on at least equal in the sense of whatever talent you applied to it. That was the idea behind the industry, and the fact that sure you have to get people have to know you in order for them to discover your game. That's a given in any social situation, but not to that degree. At least that was something that was completely unexpected. And in fact, I actually kind of like had thought over the years, like, what if like Zoe Quinn would played herself as the victim of Nathan Grayson being a casting couch kind of guy? I mean, like, that's a completely different narrative that could have gone on, but that's not what happened. Because in a sense, like, Zoe Quinn is a victim in herself, because she played that game of basically having those close relationships so that she could get noticed. So in some ways, like, you can play her as a sympathetic character that way, but that's not how it ended up. That's not how it was played by the press or by herself. Those were her friends, and she was going to stick by them. So okay, well, that's how it's going to be, and we're going to have to tell the story. But rather than addressing that issue, it became about the gamer identity, which is what brought everyone else on board. Because at first it was just a developer problem, a indie dev problem, and the press. And then it became an actual culture war when they declared war on the gamer identity, and that's what really kicked it off. That's what surprised me. I think that surprised everyone else too. Like, why in the world did you do this?
When you say pushing your politics in your games, what does that mean?
Okay, that one, I think when I came across that question, that one actually made me think a lot about what does that mean, because a lot of people don't know how to address this. There's a certain at least in my mind, when you tell a story, you're trusting the person to tell you a story, a good story. You're not there because the person wants to stick a hidden lesson in there for you one way or another, or at least, or even a lesson in one way to push it one direction or another. I think that like, for instance, like, this is something that really surprised me with the especially with the progressive left, is why didn't they learn from all the Christians who tried to put the Bible man in their games, or Super Noah in their games? Like, how ridiculous did that turn out? And like, you're basically taking Mario and you're going to shove Noah in there and make it a Bible thing. That doesn't work, because, well, one, it's an awful game, and two, it doesn't teach anything that you want it to teach. Like, so how does that help? And especially with the social justice end, it's like, okay, well, it doesn't fit the medium. It doesn't respect the story. It doesn't respect the storyteller. It doesn't respect the audience. Basically, you're talking down to them and just using this as the way to sugarcoat the pill of whatever you want to feed them, whether it's blue, red, black, or white. Whatever color pill you want to shove down their throat. It's very disingenuous. So even it doesn't matter what your ideology is, you have to respect the medium, the story, and what you're trying to do. And for the most part, if you respect the story, the story, whatever lesson will come out of whatever stuff is in there. But if you try to shove it down someone's throat, that's really the problem. And it doesn't matter what you believe. You have to respect the medium of itself. And I'm sure, like, there's a whole bunch of stories that you've read where it's all of a sudden you're in the middle of a story, and all of a sudden the author's politics or personal views are like shoved in there for some reason. I don't know. Have you ever read Ready Player One?
No, but I've read Starship Troopers.
Okay, well, I mean, I don't know if you okay. And when you're reading Ready Player One, and this is imagine this being read out by Will Wheaton, okay? Because Will Wheaton was the actual person who read the book. But there's a whole section as you're reading through the book. There's a whole, like, 2 pages where the author goes around with, like, he talks about the advantages of masturbation and how great they are. And I'm like reading this, going like, did you have to put this in the book? This is totally unnecessary for you to do that. Like, it didn't add anything to the plot, and it was kind of weird that you put this in there. I mean, sure, the main character is going through a really bad breakup and all sorts of things like that, but there's like a whole, like, 2 or 3 pages that I'm like, this could be cut out of the book, and I'm surprised the editor didn't do it. But, like, is that really necessary? That's the kind of things that you kind of run into sometimes when you're reading books. Like, what's his name? Stephen King. He goes on these big political rants on Twitter, and the last time he did that, someone posted, like, chapters of it on Twitter where the kids, there's a whole section where the kids are actually having an orgy. I'm like, what? I didn't know that wasn't it. Of course, they wouldn't put it in the TV or the movie or anything like that. but that actually happened in the book. And like, where the hell did that come from, Stephen? And like everyone, just sort of like pressing him on his politics and where is this coming from? Why'd you write this scene? That kind of question comes up. So I mean, in works of art, sure, people's point of view do come up, but there's also sometimes it feels like the author or someone has some sort of problem that they want to put out there, and it happens. I mean, sure, but I don't. The better you're able to keep yourself out of the story, and the more you let the story speak for itself, the better. And I don't know if you know this, but like that was the big contention between Tolkien and Lewis. So like Tolkien basically said, let the story tell itself, and Lewis was like, no, you have to make it a Christian allegory of some sort, and that was a big problem between the two of them. So, and of the two, I think Tolkien has a longer lasting legacy. I mean, everything we have for video games and role playing games and everything comes from him. And that's why I think Tolkien was just that much better a storyteller, because he just, there are many themes in it that are very much with his religion and his belief system. But the legacy that he left, because he allowed people the freedom to explore the world in the way that he wanted, was far more far reaching and much more edifying for everyone, and so much better the culture for it.
What about overtly political games like Metal Gear Solid or Detroit Become Human?
Now that's when it's like an exploration of story. I mean, like if it's within the story framework and you know what you're getting into, like then that's something completely different. I think it's sort of like a contract of the story that you're telling. When someone, I think whenever someone goes into and like what is it? Like it's sort of like you going into a movie about women's suffrage. You know what it's going to be about, and you know what's going on, and you know what's playing forth in whatever story it is. Or if it's something with Martin Luther King Jr., it's you're not going there because it's not going to be political on some level, right? You know what the story is going to be about. Also, walking into a religious movie, that's what's there. I think the problem is when it's outside the bounds of the story contract that you're making. Like if you want to go to a fantasy world that has nothing to do with our politics and our problems, and you want to escape the world for a while, and someone inserts modern day politics into it, you're basically breaking the contract that you're making with the audience. And that's what people are mostly upset about, is that the storyteller is making a contract with you saying, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take you on an adventure away from here where you can forget your troubles for a while, and then I'm going to shove this into your face. That's the way it feels. And I think it has to do with the story contract that you make based on the setting of the world you're inviting them into. And some people want to go into it and engage with it and contend with it. But that's up front. It's not coming in from behind, like all of a sudden a sneaky thing. Sort of like, dumping a picture, dumping pornography in the middle of a kid's show. You definitely don't want to do that. It's like contract is safe for kids. Okay, that means certain things.
I don't normally bring up questions from the chat, but this is a pretty good one, I think. Lord
Okay, no
Nurgle
problem.
asks that he
Hi,
says that
Nurgle.
Stan Lee at a Q&A once said that he writes his story first, and then afterwards he goes in and adds messages where it can fit in. What do you
I
think of
mean,
that?
if that works with the way he's told it, and then his audience trusts him, and he's been able to do it in the way that he does, and all more power to him. I mean, X-Men in itself is all about people who don't fit into society one way or another. That speaks on many levels to different people. So and the prejudices thereof, and he does a very good exploration of both sides of the coin. Professor X versus Magneto, right? Magneto is a negative. I'm going to retribution against people who are against me, versus Professor X, who wants to live in harmony with people who with the people who just don't understand them and want to educate people. Like he plays between the sides. So but that's the thing. Like when you walk into that setting and you know what X-Men's about, you expect those themes and you expect what's going on there. And I think that's where a lot of people they expect there's a certain contract you make with the storyteller, and the storyteller also has the expectation to stay within the bounds of the canon and of what the story is about. There are ways of breaking storytelling rules as well as in-universe rules that violate what people expect of you. And so there's a certain respect that people should have all around, because they're dealing with something that's greater than themselves. It's not just simply the plaything of the IP owner. It's greater than both the audience and the author. And the author has the privilege of being the storyteller. and they have a grave responsibility. And this is something that I think people don't really quite get, is that the IP is not merely a plaything; it's something greater, and we have, each of us have responsibility to do so, and the audience themselves, they have responsibility to, in a sense, call out when they think something doesn't fit, and they also have to protect the story itself. So I think there's a place for all of us in this, and I think that conversation is lost because everyone's saying, well, the IP owner, they own it and they can do whatever they want. That's not true, and we all know that. Even the original writers, I mean, two original writers that have really messed up their own IP, not badly, but they overstepped it. Well, Lucas, for one, when people were talking about episode one with the midichlorians thing, that is an in-universe breaking the rules of the lore of Star Wars, and Lucas himself knew it and stepped away from it very quietly. And another person who's struggling it right now is J.K. Rowling with Fantastical Beasts. She's breaking the rules of her universe many times over, as well as the lore of established characters. And even though she's the original creator, she's breaking certain rules, and people are starting to talk about not necessarily her politics, but basically how she's handling the story, and the story itself is bigger than her now. And unfortunately, she's treating it like it's her own special thing, but it's not. It really is bigger than her, and I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand about these stories.
Is everything political though?
Okay, no. I mean, if your world is really small, then yeah, everything should be political. Like everything's sexist, everything's racist, everything's homophobic, right? I mean, that's also the problem with a lot of Christians. Like everything's about Christ and everything's about Jesus. And like, no, there are places in the world that's bigger, and the world is more fantastical if you allow itself to be. And if you don't, then I really feel bad for those people who always feel everything's political. And honestly, to be truthful, people who think like that are pretty darn depressed. If you really think about it, most people who you think are like that are probably seriously dealing with a lot of issues, and most of the time probably on edge, or never allowing themselves to rest and relax. I don't know about you. Like, how about you, Kevin? Do you feel like there are people like that in your life who are far too political and don't know when to rest?
Um, I think some people would say that I'm like that actually.
Then maybe there's a chance for you to say, like, I mean, but the thing is, you're a gamer, so like you do know there's a place for you to sit down, relax, and play video games. And there are people in the world who say you don't even play video games because that takes away from time when you can be an activist.
But I'm
I mean,
also a very weird person in the sense that I like also in theory am a
mhm.
political streamer and talk about politics all the time for like a hobby on the
Yeah,
internet. So like it's sort of a weird. I'm. It's probably okay to some degree that I'm political, but I have noticed too that I do think that it harms my relationships with people to some extent. I think that it would be better if I was able to decompress more.
yeah. I
But
mean, like,
when
can you
I
imagine someone talking to you about Jesus all the time? It'd probably make you sick of them.
no,
It's
for
the same
sure.
thing.
And it is, and I feel like it's something I need to work on as a person actually, because like I'll be doing these streams and I'll be talking about politics and then I'll be like thinking while I'm by myself and I'll be like trying to form like better arguments and explore different ideas and like always thinking about like okay, how am I going to structure this? How am I going to do this thing? And it's all work with this specific thing, like exploring ideas, building arguments, tearing down arguments, doing research, and then like I go to talk to somebody and sometimes I'm like I'll bring up politics stuff with them, or they'll say something that's political, and I'll jump on that chance to do it. I feel like it's something that I'm better at than I used to be, to a significant degree, but it's still something that I feel like I need to take a break from it sometimes, and maybe
Like,
maybe doing streams every single day about GamerGate, just to get these interviews knocked out, isn't like the healthiest way to approach that.
well, I
But
hope they at least break you up a little bit of that. I mean, I can imagine just sitting next to someone, looking at them, tapping your feet, and all of a sudden saying, "Have you heard of our Lord and Savior, Vivian James?" you know, you got to, I hope I can at least break it up with a little bit of humor.
yeah, but no, I mean, like I honestly though. I don't want to get stuck on this topic for so long. That's why I'm doing these interviews and try to rush through them. And I'm doing one or in a couple cases I had scheduled at 1.2 on a single day. and these things go for hours. Because like I want to knock it out and I want to get it done, and I don't want this to be something where 3 years from now or even like 1 year from now I'm still stuck on this. I want to get this project finished, and that's going to require a lot of hard work, and I'm not afraid to put the hours in. And this is like the easiest portion of it right here, these conversations. The
And
hardest part is, the editing the transcripts, which I haven't even started doing yet, and then of course scheduling people, because I've learned that it's very difficult to schedule people,
mhm.
very difficult, because you'll have so many people, and I'm not calling anybody out. You have so many people who, won't reply, or they'll reply and they'll reply like once every 3 days, and it's like, well, I'm trying to, I got an opening at I got an open at 7 p.m. next Wednesday. Does that work for you? And then they don't reply until 2 days later, and then it's like, well, sorry, I already gave that slot to somebody else, and then it's like it's complete disaster to try and schedule stuff with huge numbers of people.
I
Um,
mean, there are only a select number of people who are terminally online like you and me.
yeah, I guess I need to be a bit more. I be a bit more understanding, but it's not that though, because even the people in the streamer space,
Yeah.
some of them are like, boom, they're professional. These are professional people. They get back to you quickly. They understand what it's like to work in this. Like they actually have like a passion for it, and like they know how to play the game, and they know how to run their shit in a professional manner. And then you got people, especially like people just starting out in the streamer space, but not just them, where it's like, oh well, maybe I'll do this, and I'll reply to you 5 days later, and it's like, and they're like, just yeah, people just, you can tell people who take their stuff seriously. They make their commitments. They say they're going to be somewhere. They're there. They get back to you quickly. And then there's other people who are just like, whatever, and like they don't take their stuff seriously. And I think that's something I've learned too. Like I don't want to be one of those people who doesn't take their stuff seriously, because I also think that those people aren't going to learn and grow in this space. I feel like they're destroying their own careers by having this lazy approach.
Well, it depends because some people don't think of this as much of a career. I mean, I'm,
True,
I'm
if it's
more than
just for
happy to talk.
fun, and some people do just view it as fun.
Yeah, and
Like
I
right
mean, I
now,
was
I
more than
do.
happy to talk with you.
Like
So,
yeah, like right now, I view it as more fun. But anyway, I'm way the fuck off topic, dude. Holy shit.
no worries, no worries. It's a conversation, not like a fill in the sheet type thing.
Yeah.
I
All
mean,
right.
it is actually, but at the same time, it should be a conversation.
All right. So, what did GamerGate mean to you?
Well, for me, like it was, well, goodness gracious. For me, it was speaking up against an obvious and total injustice. It was pretty for me. It was for me pretty black and white that there was a lot of problems in terms of integrity and lying, and how big the lie got. I think that's what also surprised every single person involved. Was that okay? Sure, it could have been solved with a couple of fixes to all these ethics policies. But then, because they doubled down on the lie that this is not about ethics, it's about sexism, it's about a culture that needs to change or die. So it's the gamer identity needs to die, and that because the gamer identity is so male centric and consumer centric, and we need to put this behind it. It blew up, and not only that, but it started reaching other places like the BBC, you know, Canadian Broadcasting, MSNBC, and it just started ballooning like crazy because rather than answering the call of fixing these ethical problems, they had to sell the narrative that there was a harassment campaign going on. There were angry people who were angry about the fact that their industry was not being truthful, and that the people who are in charge of this industry, the journalists, are not presenting us with the really best games that are out there. They're just presenting their friends. And rather than addressing those issues, they make it all about social justice, which it really wasn't at the very beginning. They made it all about social justice and how these misogynist men want to kick women out and all sorts of other reasons why this has nothing to do with ethics and journalism. They use that as a cloud cover for everything. And then all of a sudden, the bigger press in the world, because it fits in their narrative of whatever social justice cause they're using, it just spiraled out of control. and I don't think no one expected it to get that weird or get that crazy. And because of that, it attracted all sorts of circuses to this whole thing. But for myself, like, what does it mean? Like, the fact that people are willing to stand up and say this is not what it is, that this is the truth, and we're going to stick by it no matter what. Taking it not only to in email campaigns and in information campaigns and charities and donations, people willing to talk about this up and down the forums that let people know what this is about, gathering information, telling the truth, all the way up to the point where we showed it to the Society of Professional Journalists. It showed me the dedication and love that people have just simply for the truth. And that meant a lot to me. And it meant a lot to me to the point where I was willing to put my name, my face, and in some ways my life on the line because, that would be SPJ Airplay was my second bomb scare. So I was willing to put my life on that one because the truth deserves to be told. And that's part of the reason you're doing this project. It deserves to be told and for people to know it. And that's what it really meant to me, was that this was clearly a lie. And there's clearly a point where we have to say that the truth is worth standing up for. And this was the line in the sand. Like, if you're willing to lie about video games, what else are you willing to lie about to us, to everyone, and create a narrative so that no one knows what the truth is? And that really became the bigger question, and why journalism after that shattered. No one trusted them after that. And it only kept on crumbling year after year. Me Too and a few other things happening after that, where people just no longer started to believe the press, and people asking the real question, like,
I
what
think what's
exactly is really true out there? We can't trust these sources. We'll have to find new ways of disseminating and talking about things, because the cultural truth tellers, quote unquote, are not telling us the truth. And I think that really was the big change that happened between what GamerGate was able to do. The big problem was that at the end of 2015 was people were worried about that the GamerGate story was simply going to die. No one's going to know about it. But because these big media idiots think that they're in charge of everything, they overstep their bounds even more. They ended up just simply falling on their own sword, and now the story's out. Everyone knows that the press is no longer worth trusting. And I think that was the big thing, because even before Gamergate, like, I don't know if you know this story, but back in 2007, there was something called Journalist. It basically is a game journal prose. Journalist was Ezra Klein's left-wing progressive list of people they can talk to create narratives. That was exposed in 2007. Like, yeah. And then also the right wing is part of that as well. They basically red versus blue. They play both sides against each other. They divide people into two different camps, so they won't be willing to talk to each other because they make everything personal. And that's the other thing that happens that I think the press is doing both in left and right, is that they try to make everything personal so no one learns how to talk about ideas, and really disseminate what really is the problem. Because if people start doing that, then politicians can't just divide people and get away with it. And whether politicians, corporations, or everyone else who has these schemes that fleece the people, if people could actually talk to one another and not get mad at each other, because it's not always about identity, it's not always about politics, it's about the truth. And if people actually started talking, then we'd actually have real problems solved, instead of selling red shirts and blue shirts and getting people to vote for their team. That never solves anything. It really is about reaching across and talking things that we're doing like right now and telling the truth. And I saw that in many ways in many parts of Gamergate, where people from all parts of the political spectrum were talking to one another, and they all agreed that this is something we should do more often. Unfortunately, as time goes on and people were trying to figure out what to do with the hashtag, because as soon as we established the fact that at SPJ Airplay that yes, there was ethical violations done by these places, that yes, the gamers were right, what do you do then? Because then the question became of social justice, and all this other stuff coming into media, people disrespecting the stories and the games and franchises that came before. Those are much bigger issues that I thought did not belong with Gamergate, because Gamergate was very, very specific. At least in my mind, it was. And that more as time goes on, more people left. My other concern was that other people would come in as grifters or even worse nefarious ideas, perhaps even honeypots or whatever else, And it probably would be best to simply just walk away from the hashtag. And I was willing to burn all my social capital to say, hey, maybe we should consider stopping and then continuing on
doing something else. And that was the whole point of the end GamerGate hashtag thing, or GG no re or whatever. And the whole idea was simply to say, GamerGate is over. We've accomplished everything, and we're going to go on doing something else. And that way, no one could bring up the corpse or pretend to be us and say, "Oh yeah, we're GamerGate," and do something really nefarious in our name, kind of thing. That was my main concern.
Well, look, we can talk about that, and I'm sure we will. But you mentioned SPJ Airplay, and you mentioned a line in the sand. I happen to have something I've pulled up here. I want to include part of this in the book if I can. It's a speech you gave. I'm
Oh yeah,
sure
the
you're
context
familiar.
of that. Yeah, the context of that, just so you know, was that nearing SPJ Airplay, everyone was falling apart, and we didn't know what happened. Was that there was some issues going on with organizing SPJ Airplay with Koretsky, Michael Koretsky, who was hosting it, and Oliver Campbell was holding a stream. People were just completely falling apart and didn't know what to do, and everyone was just, and that's when I asked to come in, and that's how that happened. Is because I really did and still do believe that we were holding the journalists to a fire, and that we should never doubt what we're doing at that point. Because in my entire experience of it, these were people who were angry at the fact that their beloved hobby was under attack. No one was speaking the truth for them. They had to do it themselves, and they had to be willing to put their lives on the line and their names on the line for this whole thing. So that's what it really meant to me at the time. And we're thinking about it now. I'm like, that really was what drove it behind. So if you want to play it, go right ahead. But it's kind of embarrassing to me now when I look back on it. But it really was how I felt.
Well, if you really don't want me to, I don't have to. But I
No,
feel
no.
like it's it's good.
There's never a thing I'm ashamed of doing this entire thing. Even the fact that my at the very end when I had that total nervous breakdown, I'm not ashamed of any of it because I put my heart out there and people knew it. And so I'm willing to let it come out again. So.
And you know what? I defended you on that because I feel like it's fine if you have strong emotions, and you know what? Like it showed you were passionate, it showed you cared. I don't think that there's nothing to be ashamed of there. You're absolutely cool.
Well, thank you. I'll mute myself while you play it.
I think what's going to happen between here and one more month is really all we have left. Mm-hmm. I think the intensity is going to get higher in trying to derail this. We're going to have to keep it under as best as we can, and I think that's part of the reason why we had all these interesting, weird debates.
I don't think you'll be able to.
Okay.
I did post it in the Discord too, if you wanted to pull up the link.
No problem.
Only the stream people will be able to hear it. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll keep quiet then. Just let me know
wait, you have the stream, all right? You can just watch.
Well, no, I had to move away from my devices, so I can't see what's going on anymore.
Okay, it's just 2 minutes. I'll go ahead and play it real quick, and then we'll jump back.
Okay, I'll leave you to it.
I won't grill you on any specific thing that was said because I know you're not hearing it.
I think what's going to happen between here and one more month is really all we have left. Mm-hmm. I think the intensity is going to get higher in trying to derail this. We're going to have to keep it under as best as we can, and I think that's part of the reason why we've had all these interesting, weird debates going on that are kind of artificial in the tag. People are sensing, especially in anti-GamerGate, that if fair play does go through, and we are heard, and the truth starts coming out, they are in serious trouble. So I think that every single effort is being made between now and the next month to get us to be disheartened, to get us to give up, to get us to think that this is all for nothing, to get us to fight each other, to get us into pointless dramas on the freaking hashtag over how to use it. Mm-hmm. I mean, for goodness sake, we've been at this for 11 months and we're debating over this stupid shit that from month one should have been, it was already out there. We've been arguing about this since month one. No matter what happens the next, we're all friends. We all know each other. We know the people we can rely on. We know the people we can trust, and we know that we can build something better from this. We're connecting with the industry in more ways than we can imagine. Now, we're not on trial. Their entire damn profession's on trial, and we're bringing the damn evidence to prove it. We're not on trial. They are. And we're going to make it better. We're going to prove to the world that this is probably one of the most progressive, most open,
most incredible and creative field there is out there, and we're going to break the media lie that the entire industry is made out of chauvinists and sexists, because they're not just hurting us as gamers, they're hurting developers. They're hurting the people who want to get in as developers because they're saying lies. And we're going to break that here and now. We just have to show up and speak the truth. The truth does not need defending. You just need to let it free. It will defend itself like a lion.
You don't need to defend the truth. The truth will defend itself. You just need to set it free. But I don't think that happened, Paulo. I don't think the truth did defend itself.
You don't think so? I think that the truth speaks to people who are looking for it. And I think that's the big thing that I've trusted in the last few years, that people who are willing to hear it, people who are willing to seek it, they'll see the truth. People who just want to see what they want to see, they're never going to see it no matter what you tell them. It's people of goodwill who will see it.
Now, obviously, anti-GamerGate people are going to say, look, some people might have cared about games journalism and creative freedom and all this stuff, but there were people who did engage in harassment, and that's a more important story than a bunch of corrupt kids' toys journalists.
And, there are a whole bunch of people who want to focus on the fact that, they want to focus on the power narrative. They have no idea who they're defending. They're defending some people who are willing to use their power in the press. And that's what I brought up at SVJ Airplay. Gawker and all those other places, they're super powerful, who are willing to crush people. People just living their lives. Like, I brought up the fact that, hey, there's a whole bunch of people who own guns in New York. We're going to publish and dox every single person in New York who owns a gun. That's Gawker. Some random person puts a tweet and Sam Biddle decides to destroy her life. Like, that's Gawker. You want to talk about power and harassment? Like that, they've been doing that for years, and the only reason they ever talk about harassment and safety was finally people were speaking up against them, and in such large numbers they didn't know how to handle it. Now all of a sudden they're worried about harassment. They weren't worried about harassment when people were losing their jobs and lives before then. Why all of a sudden then? And honestly, who lost their job out of everyone in quote unquote anti-Gamergate? Really, like, who lost their job and were harassed out of the industry? No one. No one was harassed. No one was harassed. I mean, sure, people were negatively talked about, and sure, like, they can say, like, oh, somebody called their house or whatnot, or did stupid things. Like, granted, there's always people doing stupid things, but we all know a lot of people on our end that also lost their lives, not their lives, but their jobs. Thankfully, no one lost their lives over this, and I'm very glad for that. But
do you think? Go ahead.
I mean, I can say I'm hand waving harassment away or something like that. It just depends on what you want to focus on. Like, for me, I was focused on telling the truth.
I think that people who are critical of Gamergate probably would say you are hand waving the harassment away. Like, yeah, like, oh, people called each other's houses and that's bad, but like, like, it's the internet, bad things happen, it sucks, whatever, move on. There's more important things like the entire industry being corrupt. Like, it sounds like you're saying that the conscious experience of this person who's getting, random people calling their house at 3 a.m, that their experience, like, doesn't matter when it's kind of a shitty thing to happen, a very shitty thing to happen.
I mean, we could talk, I guess, about being a public figure, because part of the dangers of the internet and of the internet in general is that everyone's a public figure in one degree or another. Being on a stream where someone could swat you because you just happen to be online. I mean, that happens a lot more often than we like to talk about, and that kind of harassment happens to certain individuals. Like, is that because of a campaign, or is it because of a couple of trolls who are doing this thing? As far as I know, as far as all the people I've ever contacted in the whole GamerGate hashtag, I talked to a lot of people. I don't know a single individual who was involved in the direct harassment of anyone in anti-Gamergate. I do know people who are involved in harassing Gamergate and myself, but like, that I don't blame that one on anti-GamerGate at all. I just blamed it on trolls.
Well, Paolo, there were a couple of pro GamerGate people who did engage in like legit harassment. I know who they are. We talked about it last night.
Right, and I think to be as an honest conversation with anti-GamerGate, if we can name who they are, they can name who they are. How come no one ever called the police on them if we can name who these people are? And how come they were never arrested in terms of harassment of all the things that are going on
Well, the police
when we
don't.
can name them?
The police don't care about internet harassment, or at least they didn't 10 years ago.
Well, then then they did their legal duty. We did our legal duty because I don't know if people remember this one. And this is actually something I was a part of. It was called the GamerGate Harassment Patrol, which we would go around and actually look at all the tweets going around the GamerGate hashtag or attacking particular people in anti-GamerGate like Zoe Quinn and would mass report them. We would mass report anything that actually happened. And a whole bunch of people who were in the GamerGate Harassment Patrol, they themselves were harassed by those trolls because they did not like the fact that there was a bunch of people going around destroying those accounts. And I think it's also been forgotten that Zoe Quinn herself thanked the GamerGate Harassment Patrol for their work because we were doing a really good job of mass reporting anyone who was harassing her, Brianna Wu, Anita Sarkeesian, and anyone else. I don't know if you remember that, but that's what happened early on in about September, October timeframe. There was a bunch of you.
I wasn't around until much later. I joined GamerGate in joined GamerGate, quote unquote, whatever that means. I got involved in the spring of 2015.
Okay, but it's just for you to remember and for you to research and find the evidence.
I'm aware of the harassment patrol. I've used it in my arguments before.
Yeah, and I was part of that. And I remember doing that specifically and talking to people. And there was a bunch of people who were on the harassment patrol who they themselves were harassed because they were stopping the trolls from having too much fun. And they actually got their own, they got doxxed in their own places too. So there were efforts on GamerGate's part to stop that harassment. And I remember being a part of it. And to help that, there was a secondary hashtag called GamerGate Hug Patrol because a whole bunch of people were being harassed trying to do that another group of people came together trying to encourage people to keep doing the right thing because people were being super discouraged by how much harassment they were getting by doing the right thing.
Now
go
ahead, sorry.
Yeah. No, you go ahead.
I don't know how much you want to get into this, but you've mentioned it. And I was probably going to bring it up anyway. Because you said you're comfortable talking about it.
Yeah, sure.
You wanted GamerGate to end after SBJ Airplay.
Not that I wanted it to end. What I just saw that the trend that was going on was that a bunch of people who were the original people who went into GamerGate for the right reasons were leaving because they figured there was nothing left that they could do or contribute positively, and they wanted to get on with their lives, and that's understandable. And for myself, okay, I can understand that people want to leave. But at the same time, I saw an influx of people coming in that were more of the grifter types, or they were far right, or they were something that didn't look like they were at all the original GamerGate people. And in many ways, they are a perfect parody of everything that everything that anti-GamerGate accused them to be. I don't know how many of them were false flags either.
Well, you're talking about a very specific community, I believe.
Possibly, but I did see. But the thing is, it could have been that at the very beginning, I didn't see them because. Well, one thing that people should know, at least in context, is that one reason why GamerGate exploded was because of something called what was it called? It was Operation
Disrespectful Nod?
No, it wasn't Disrespectful Nod. It was the one where Skynet. It was called Op Skynet. Do you know that one?
Everybody on Twitter should follow each other.
Exactly. Yeah, everyone on Twitter should follow each other, especially if you're talking about GamerGate. And what happened was that, and Twitter did not expect this, because we created a super dense network of people who followed each other, which made it very easy to find information and trend anything we ever wanted on Twitter, because the algorithm did not account for the fact that there would be a whole bunch of people who super followed each other. And there were tens of thousands of accounts who did so. So one of the things, I saw pretty much the entire network with most people on it because I was one of the bigger accounts and I mass followed everyone else. And so what that led to was that, at least at the very beginning, I saw the kinds of people and tweets that people would make. And as time went on, I began to see the change as people were leaving and more people coming in, more of the types of people that it was attracting tended to be more far right, like ridiculously far right, that I would think that they were parody accounts. And I didn't. And at that point, around the end of SVJ Airplay, I started seeing an influx of more of them coming in because they had trying to be hangers on to the hashtag. So at that point, I was like, okay, well, if that's going to happen, I can imagine people starting to say some ridiculous stuff and claim to be GamerGate when they're really not. They're just there to cause trouble and or to quote unquote hijack the entire network. And so my suggestion was, and to many people who agreed, was simply to say, hey, we're done. We've accomplished our whole thing with this, and we're going to move on to do our own thing, whether it be on talking about the social justice angle of it, or or the the destruction of old IPs that we don't like, or whatever else you want to go into, because no one really would agree on the politics of that. Some people were more liberal, some people were more conservative. So there really wasn't a really good way of going forward at that point. And my suggestion was simply end the hashtag quote unquote, and just say that everyone who was involved at the very beginning is kind of gone now. Make it official.
Now, there's many directions we can go with this. The far right people, I'm sure people have read. We talked about this yesterday. This was back when GG Revolt sort of became a thing, where these people broke off from GamerGate and sort of made their own movement and went after people like you
that
as
was
well.
much earlier. GG Revolt was much earlier in the year. GG Revolt was more like...
Well, the forum started then, but the forum started... Well, it started like right before SBJ Airplay, essentially.
Yeah, it was, and part of the reason was because there tended to be a bit of a groupthink circling GamerGate, both in the in the 8chan at that time. People don't know about that one, but it was called 8chan, and there was also KIA, Kotaku in Action, where there tended to be some groupthink there, and what they were doing was and this is where I kind of appreciate them, is that they were a dissenting voice, mostly in the sense that they were concerned about that the mods in both places tended to only favor certain discussions, especially when it came to social justice and avoiding social justice talking points. To their credit, and to somewhat I agree with them, is that there is an angle of social justice to GamerGate, but at the same time, I did not think that it could possibly be addressed because the hashtag itself was not really consolidated around that issue, and there was great divisions among the people there. But they were severely trying to push it rightward, and I didn't think that would work. Even though I politically align more right, I did not think that it would actually work in terms of the gamer hashtag. It just didn't work. And so basically, I went around talking to people, saying, "Hey, what do you think about the idea of ending the hashtag?" A whole bunch of people said yes. The people who said no, and the people who really ultimately basically stopped me from trying to do this thing, were people who stood most to have financial gain from keeping GamerGate alive and using it as a sense for whatever. I mean, you could argue grift that they were doing. They needed it to be politically alive. So that's the people who ended up saying no ultimately to it. And there were some people who actually went around and what do you call it? Falsely framed what I was trying to do. And oddly enough, and kind of ironically enough, considering his history over the last few years, the person who captured this the best was Mundane Matt. He actually captured the actual story pretty well when he covered it way back when. But since then, Matt's gone off on his own thing.
Now, some of the people disagreed with you about this notion.
Yeah, a lot of people did. I mean, strongly. Very strongly.
And most of the communication, I believe, on this, if not all, correct me if I'm wrong, was through DMs, essentially. You reaching out to people privately and saying...
a few of them were DMs, and a few of them were actually talking to them, not face-to-face, but talking to them over whatever, Skype or whatever we were using at the time. I forgot what it was.
But this was not a public conversation, correct?
No, it was first trying to talk to a few individuals to see if there was enough if I thought it was, hey, is this a bad idea or is this a good idea? And talking to individuals on it, and then I was just talking to people who I thought would more. I talked to about a dozen people. Is this a good idea or a bad idea? before I got stopped.
And there was a specific reason you got stopped by a specific person, and that specific person was me.
Was it you?
It was me.
No, I thought it was actually Ralph who did it.
No.
Because the last person,
Ralph
last person I
wanted the
thought,
hashtag to die. He didn't consider himself GamerGate around that time. If he wanted GamerGate to end too, but it was me, if you recall. I'm the one who talked about how there was a conspiracy to end GamerGate from within.
oh,
I don't think I phrased it that way, but I talked about how some people were talking in private about ending the hashtag, and how I thought this was a betrayal of the democratic principles of the movement, essentially. That this shouldn't be done in private, that we should talk about this openly.
yeah.
And if you have an idea to propose, make a video, write an article, that's fine. But this idea where I'm going to get the perception that myself and some people had was that you were going to get a bunch of the big names on board to all sort of declare Gamergate over at one time. That was the perception. I think, did you say that directly?
No, I didn't say it. I don't think I said it directly. I wanted to know what everyone's thoughts were. And if we all didn't agree, because I didn't think we would, the person who I actually talked to last, and this is actually just so you know in context, the person I talked to last was Allison Tiemann of the Honey Badgers. And Allison said it was a bad idea. And around that time, when she said it was a bad idea, and she gave me her reasoning for it, at the time I agreed with it. And I said, okay, well, if that's the case, Allison, if you say no, then there's no reason. And they're one of the biggest part of Gamergate at that point. There would be no way to really do it. And unfortunately, that's when you started getting involved in talking about it. Like, I didn't get a chance because I never presented it publicly, because I was still in the middle of just saying, hey, is this a crazy idea? Maybe you guys can tell me it's a crazy idea. Allison told me it was a crazy idea. And so I said, okay, well, all right. I was going to walk away from it at that point and not even mention it because it was dumb. Well, I ended up paying for it, so I didn't mind.
Yes, you paid too high a price. And we're actually really, I think, on good terms now, Paolo. But
well, let me put it this way. The high. Okay, you said I paid a high price. Well, here's the price I paid. I had a pretty public probably public, what do you call it? Mental breakdown in front of everyone, because I really thought I was going to be. I thought I was in such bad shape. I don't know how long it's going to take me to recover, because I didn't expect the blowback to be so bad, nor did I expect how much I would react to it. And so when I realized I was in a really bad space mentally, I ended up streaming saying, "Hey, if I'm not able to get back online, I just want to tell you guys, I really care about all you guys. I know there's a lot of good guys that are out there that are in this. I felt I didn't know who was really real and who was messing with me. That's how bad felt like I was turned around. But let me put it this way: in the end, it forced me to get away from being online. It told me that I was focused way too much on being on the internet and way too involved with this politically and all sorts of things. It reminded me that I have people that are relying on me and I need to take care of, my family specifically. My eldest son, who saw me go through this breakdown, he and I became really, really good friends, best friends after that, because he knew I needed his help and he was there to help me. I mean, I'll say, like, even though I paid a price for it mentally, the years and months after, the months and years afterwards, man, like, they were really a good period for me to just simply get away from everything, focus on my family, focus on what's really important, the people who are around me in real life. Although I would say there are many important things in the world, such as, hey, we have all this activism we got to do and we got to tell the truth about these things. The most important people are the ones who are in real life around you. And it forced me to do that, because I have to say, like, I was a pretty stubborn asshole at that point, and I kept thinking that what I was doing was righteous and good, and being religious and all, like, saying I'm doing God's will and doing what's right, and we're fighting for the truth, and you can tell I really believe that. But at some point, I needed to be humbled and told, hey, your family needs you, and you need to walk away from this. And and that's how I took it. I took it as basically a lightning bolt hitting me out of the sky saying, Paulo, you're being a dumbass, and I'm going to take you out
so that you can focus on who's really important. And if it took, you to do it, knocking me completely off my ass because I totally needed it, well, then I'm here to say thank you. Because it made me, it made me look like I'm a complete total dumbass in front of everyone online. I don't mind that. What mattered is that my family stayed intact. I focused on what was more important. I got my life together and got away from GamerGate just to focus on that. So, you may think that I was a pretty high price to pay, but you know what? Screw the hashtag, screw the hot, screw the damn, we call it Twitter account. I don't mind looking like an ass if it means that my family and everything else that matters to me came through in the end. And that's what really matters. So that's why in the end, you're not good terms because that's not how I took it. I didn't take it as you sabotaging me or me taking it that way. No, I took it pretty much as divine retribution for me being an asshole and thinking too big of myself.
Well, I'm glad you're open to talking about this. I know we've talked privately about this a couple times. And I think that my reaction at the time wasn't the best because you and I at the time did not really know each other. Like we were both aware of each other and we maybe talked once or twice, but like we were in like different spheres of GG almost, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
And you reached out to me because I was becoming like a more and more of a big figure within the movement with the creative freedom side of things. And I don't know how much of my stuff you saw, but I think it was clear that I wasn't on the Indit side. And maybe that was you trying to reach out and maybe you thought you could change my mind on this.
Well,
But,
I think you were on the people. I think I might have reached out to you and asking, "Hey, you want to talk about something?" Before I got a chance to talk to you. I think you were on my list because I was getting actually notes from. What was I getting to talk to? It was QQ was one of the people telling me to talk to you.
Yeah, and I'm sure QQ wait, QQ was on board with the project. Oh, that wasn't he? He was involved in some capacity with your, but wasn't he trying to sabotage you from within?
I don't know. I really don't.
Well, you could never trust anything that Puka said. He
well, I don't.
he wasn't.
That was the problem. I don't know. I didn't know who to trust. I mean, heck, Nurgle's on this. Was talking. I was talking to Nurgle. I had no idea if Nurgle was in it either. So, how layers and layers and layers of people you've never met. You've only talked to them online. You're not sure if they're really real. You're not sure who's messing with you. It could really begin to mess with your head, and that's why That's why I ended up breaking down at the very end because I didn't know who was messing with me. I don't. I won't attribute any malice to what he's doing. He and I got along very well. In fact, I'm the one who called him the Puka. At least as far as I know, I'm the one who called him the Puka the first time. Because he's like, "What's a Puka?" And I said, "Well, a Puka is a trickster." I think I'm the one who told him that. So, I don't know if he really was involved or if he was causing me to actually talk to the people to get you triggered. In either case, like at the end, I'm like, you know what?
Which
what would happen?
Yeah, I don't hold any ill will towards QQ. In fact, we were on decent terms until we weren't on decent terms. But no, I have nothing against him. We follow each other on Twitter. But yeah, he always would play everyone against each other and would launch all sorts of psyops. It seemed like if I were to peg him as something, it would probably be as like the kind of person who wants to purposely put you in these sorts of situations to see what kind of person you really are. Sort of like the Joker almost. Where he's not like quite a troll, like he did, I think, genuinely believe in a lot of the stuff. But he also wanted to make sure that the people he worked with were genuine. And so he would put you through like stuff like he put you and me through. Where he would put us through tests to see if we were people of strong moral character, essentially. Personal integrity.
He pretty much embodied what the shapeshifter is. That was his archetype as I saw him on the internet. He was a shapeshifter, and you don't trust shapeshifters only to the extent that you know that they're there to cause trouble. And in either case, I always felt from him that whatever happens through this, no matter what came out of it, I am not ashamed of the person who came out the other end. Because I know at my worst, at my worst, falling apart and mentally incapable of telling who's real or not, I was still telling people to be good to each other. I was telling people I still cared about them. And I was telling people that they really should talk to one another. Heck, I didn't even know there were federal agents who were on me at that point. And I told them, like, if they were, that I know they're doing their job and they're trying to make sure people are safe. I mean, like, that's the kind of thing I
Federal
felt like.
agents on you?
I mean, that's the thing. Like, you don't know. Like, at that point, I was so gaslit. You get the idea, like, because I showed my face in like SPJ AirPlay, like people are starting to tell you, like, the feds might be on you, or you might be monitored because you're a right winger, or because you're part of GamerGate. Like, you don't know. At the same time, it's in the back of your head. Like, I mean, unfortunately, and this is the unfortunate part, is that we do know people who eventually had those mental breakdowns, who did think federal agents were after them, and who actually did end up hurting their family members. If you could talk for Seattle for Truth, that was one guy who was involved, eventually became anti-GamerGate and hated the hashtag after a while, but he was so gaslit badly that he ended up killing his father.
Yeah. Yeah,
And like, that's the sad truth of like how badly you can get turned around in this thing. I mean, how do I know? And this is something that was a good question. Like, we're getting in the way of the media telling narratives, and that their power to cause and move people to move one direction or the other based on whatever lies they want to get to. And we're there questioning their power to their faces. How likely are you under their spotlight? Well, thankfully, in the end, it turned out not really on my part, because I ended up disappearing. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, and to be clear, I just for you and for posterity, I'll say that you and I talked maybe like a week or two after this happened, because you
Yeah.
disappeared off the internet, but you and I got in touch. I don't even know how it was. Maybe we had like a mutual friend or something in GG, which is probably what it was. And I kind of regretted. I still regret, I guess. I don't regret it anymore. I mean, I think it was bad, but like I don't have a mental issue with it. Um, I don't think I handled that situation very well. I feel like you came to me, and so you came to me and you're like, you want to end privately, and you're like, I want to end GamerGate, and you're like, I got these other people on board. I think you did mention you had some other people on board, and I think I even got you to provide me with a list of people, um, or at least this partial list,
Yeah.
which that's where the perception was that, hey, wait a second, he's going to get all these big names in Gamergate to all declare it over at one time. That's where, and maybe that wasn't the plan at all. You just floated it by these people. They thought it was a good idea.
Right, that's what I did. And then I
Yeah.
would start it, and then everyone else would chime in what they thought. But Allison said no, and Allison's a huge part of it. I mean, as much as I disagreed with, in the end, I ended up disagreeing with a lot of what she was doing. But at the same time, like, I figured, like, she's such a big part of it, and a huge number of people are Honey Badger fans, especially with the men's rights movement type stuff. There's no way it could have happened.
No, I don't think those people were even that big.
I mean, I thought they were, at least, because they the big thing they did, especially I think Calgary Expo, and they
Oh, they
were
were large, but they weren't super large. And most of the stuff they did though was within their own podcast and stuff like that. You didn't need those people on board for your plan. You probably needed me though. And I was not on board. And I nuked your plan from orbit. And even the people who you had agreeing public and private, I think some of those people even kind of stabbed you in the back, which sucks. Because they didn't want the backlash.
Yeah, I didn't mind. I mean, at the same time, like, I was willing, as I said to them and I said to others, I was willing to take the social, what do you call it, social backlash on it. I just didn't expect the level of mental damage it would do.
Yeah,
it's one of those things like, this will hurt, and you don't realize how much it'll hurt. Like, I'm surprised at how much power social media has, even over perceived slights or perceived negativity. And even though I know that there was a lot of good people who are out there, just the sheer number of people who would negatively say something to you surprised me. And I think that's something that people don't know about social media. And heck, like, at the time that happened, I was mid-30s. Like, you'd think that an adult brain would be able to handle it, but no. There are a lot of people who actually go through huge, like, therapy through this, and I did myself too, to make sure I was okay. Like, hey, like, social media can have a massive mental backlash, especially if you do something that's negative. And I think that's part of the reason why social media was developed as a tool, in a sense, to move people politically left, in my opinion, towards certain progressive values. And that's what I believe that it would develop for. And now that Twitter's no longer under the control of Silicon Valley, that's part of the reason why there's so much pushback against it.
But you say do something negative. I don't think you should have to adopt my framing of it.
What do you mean?
Especially since I'm not even sure I adopt my framing of it. Maybe you were right that Gamergate should have ended
I mean,
in 2016.
people still bring up. Some people bring out the corpse all the time. They say, "Oh, Gamergate was this." I'm like, "Okay, come on, guys." I don't know. I mean, honestly, I just thought I thought I would do what was best and say what I think was the right idea. I just thought people fighting all the time said, you know what? Maybe the reason we're fighting all the time is because of this thing, and we don't all politically agree with like. And I think that forcing "quote unquote" the hashtag to go one direction or the other, which people were talking about, like let's just say well, we're all done, and then that's it. We'll go our separate ways and do whatever, because the big fight especially was Vivian and Ralph. So I'm like, you know what? Maybe we should do something about it. In either case, I didn't really blame anyone else for it, and the fact that I myself was too heavily invested into it, and I need to get back to my family, and that's really what mattered. So, in either case, I don't hold anything against you, man. And at the same time, whether or not it needed to be ended or not, that's up for history to decide. And we kind of joke about the fact that people bring out the corpse of Gamergate out every so often just to say, hey, these group of terrible people who did this. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Do you really believe there's a bunch of gamers out there who really want to push women out of gaming? You really believe that? And if you really do, I'm like, man, you really don't know gamers at all.
Yeah, it's I felt at the time, at least, that while SPG Airplay was a great moment, I was never against the project, never against Airplay. Though obviously, would have been better if Milo weren't there. But but he was one person out of 6 people, so
yeah.
But I thought there was a lot of work that still needed to be done. I felt like with the censorship stuff in particular, with the torrential downpour, I feel like torrential downpour needed to happen. We needed to have this pushback against the censorship of games that were being localized.
Well, I agree, and I think that's still a problem we're fighting now. And a lot of the anime community knows about it now, which I'm thankful for. That they're aware of the fact that they have censors that are happening from the localization end. But there is also legitimate questions about localization. I also have to say there are certain things that localization has issues with. Like, how would you approach certain aspects of anime culture, or even the way it's translated? There are certain problems that I don't know are surmountable, because Japan tends to be a lot more sexually progressive, especially in their art. So how do you handle that outside of Japan, and what do you do? So I mean those are interesting questions. I mean there's often a joke about how everyone's always so up in arms about anime, this girl is underage. I'm like, pretty much every character and protagonist in anime is underage, because high school is the age that people felt they could be free, which is why so much anime is that age group. And there's a lot of sexualization in anime, so it's how do you handle that? I mean, honestly, I don't know. That to be fair, sure, people will say translate it straight as possible. But then I'm like, well, if that's the case, there's a lot of hentai that will not be able to be brought over. But that's a whole other discussion of localization. I mean, sure, we do have a problem with localization, and I don't know, but at the same time, I don't know what level of responsibility, and there's a lot of problems, because Japan's culture doesn't necessarily translate over to the United States and the rest of the Western world. So.
Now, to you, was Gamergate just about ethics, pretty much?
I mean, the hashtag, yes, and the reason why I think it is that is because it was the most clear cut of the whole bunch. The social justice angle was just simply as a shield to deflect from their ethics violations. The problem is that there really are problems in terms of social justice, in terms of how do you address it. and the games industry does have a guilty conscience over it. I don't think people understand, but there's one aspect of this whole social justice thing is that the games industry itself has an existential anxiety. A lot of the developers don't even know if their jobs are worth having. They don't know if what they're doing is an ultimate good or evil for society. They make video games. They don't know if they're actually helping people or if they're actually pulling people away from their lives, from their families, from their jobs, and taking away people's fortunes with gambling mechanics. A lot of developers feel like their jobs are basically robbing people of time, money, and energy where it could be best spent elsewhere. And if you read some of the literature from GDC, because I'm from the developer end, there's a whole bunch of people who are like even wondering like, what in the hell are we doing? Like, are games meaningful? Do our games actually contribute to society? And there's a bunch of articles that are talking about that games could be a better world, and maybe we can use games for good. It was called the Games for Good initiative that ended up happening. The people were talking about that even just a decade before GamerGate, talking about how games could actually be a force for good, and World of Warcraft being like one of those things that we could use as a model for people doing good in the world, kind of thing. And then around the same time, so people had an existential anxiety of whether or not games were actually contributing to the well-being of society. And when 2012 happened, when Anita Sarkeesian came out and said, "You guys are actually harming women," that guilty conscience really collapsed in a lot of people. That's part of the thing that's a part of the atmosphere and the environment that a lot of developers were under, was that they were really wondering if their jobs were doing any good. Someone comes around and says, "No, you're actually harming women." And that just destroyed a lot of people. And so they wanted to do whatever they could to actually help women. So it's a lot of like, that's part of the background of this whole, like, we'll shift the games around, we'll not do damsels in distress. Well, I mean, that's part of, because there are good people in the games industry who really want to make positive change in the world, and that's what's driving a lot of this changes, especially in terms of like sexualization and how you treat women. And that's something that's a legitimate concern that a lot of people have, and they don't have a framework for, even if their jobs are even valuable or if it takes away from society. So I don't think people realize that.
Was there any value in the feminist critique, like the Anita Sarkeesian critique of video games?
If it was based on honesty, then I'd say yes. But the problem is Anita approached it from a place of dishonesty, a place of grifting, and I don't think people have a problem with like approaching her work because of that grifting angle. The fact that she really wasn't a fan of video games and people brought that out, or the fact that she took a game like Hitman, which penalizes you from killing people except your target, and framing it as such as like, you can stuff bodies in boxes and whatnot. There's a lot of, that's just going over the old things that she did that were lies, outright lies, and reframing of things just so she can get her point across. Like the feminist critique, like, sure, there's a place for people to talk about how you could possibly make things better. But the problem and approach, especially a lot of critical approach that we have in society, isn't meant to be constructive criticism. It's just meant to divide people. And that's pretty much one of the major problems. Like, divide people on sex, divide people with race, divide people with sexual orientation, divide people so that they fight each other. And that just disintegrates whatever culture they're in. And that's where I think the main problem is. Anita's school of thought doesn't come from a place of loving the actual culture. It comes from a place of dividing and destroying it. And I think that's really the main thrust of her problem. So I don't have a problem with the feminist critique. I just seriously question the motivations and the purpose that she has in mind, because I don't think she had it in mind to try to make things better or tell better stories. It was just a matter of just, in a sense, grifting, and for people to pay her to consult so that they get her feminist thumbs up, so that they can basically, that's a grift that she had. She gives you the thumbs up, your game's good, and no one will criticize you for being sexist.
Is there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you need to go? You can finish your.
No, that was just the idea. Like that's the way she operated.
Does there need to be though? Do you need to be a gamer to analyze video games from a critical lens, or is there, if you want to like defend her argument or defend her viewpoint, it would be, you know what, I don't really know that much about video games maybe, but I do think that feminism is good for the world. I think that analyzing works of art and entertainment from like this lens is going to lead to like better outcomes in the world, like less sexist people, because the video games are to some extent reinforcing a sexist culture or attitude. And so therefore I could use this argument, this lens and framework that I've developed to critique it, and that'll make the world a better place. Even if video games themselves, like, who cares? Like, if they're video games, you know?
I think that it comes from. I think it's what places it come from. Like, first of all, it's dishonest. First of all, her approach is dishonest. If she came in as an outsider and said, "This is what I see, and this is what I believe," as opposed to, "Oh, I've been a video game player all my life." I mean, first of all, it has to come from a place of honesty. If she came in as an outsider and she critiqued it as an outsider who's willing to learn and who may actually be mistaken, and hey, this is what I think, this is how it comes across to me, and the people saying, well, no, that's not really how it is, and here's another framing that especially with Samus, and how the idea that Samus takes off her clothes when you're playing her. There's a like a secondary way of viewing it, as opposed to being a sexist type thing, that the longer you spend with someone and the better you get at the game, the more intimate you are with the mechanics of the game and the person behind the mask. There's two ways to frame the same thing, and that's a worthy discussion. Like, you could take it one way, which is she's stripping off clothes for you, or two, you can take it another way, which is as you are more intimate and get to know the game better, and you're spending time with the person, you get to see them in a more intimate manner. There's two ways of taking the same framing. And if it was more of that kind of line of conversation and that kind of like dynamic where you can talk about how things could come across multiple dimensions, that would have been far more productive. But that's not how it happened. That happened was, if you don't believe what I say, you're sexist. There's no discussion at that point. Like, it's the same thing that's happened a lot with a lot of our other pop culture stuff. If you don't like this product, it's because you're a racist, sexist, homophobe. No, you're just a shitty storyteller.
Do you think there are any issues with gamer culture, quote unquote, or gaming culture?
No, there's always a problem there, any culture. So I don't know where to begin with that one. But yeah, there's always a problem. Like, I don't say gaming culture is perfect. No one would ever say that. I mean, has anyone said that actually to you?
I don't think anyone's ever said that.
No, there are certain a lot of problems. I mean, heck, my kids growing up and watching them, like, they're playing games and they're like, geez, that was a pretty terrible lobby. Or was it you're trying to play a game of Apex Legends and your teammate's the most toxic person ever. I'm like there was this one time I was playing this Apex game. This guy like completely goes off on me because I picked up a piece of ammo that he was slow to pick up, and I'm like, okay, I'll just grab it. He just started going off on me. I'm like, dude, we're trying to win this game together. If you really want it, here, you can have it. And then when I gave it to him, he's like, I'm sorry, I'm just having a really bad day. I'm like, okay, well, I'm glad you're able to talk to me about that. Some people just go off for no reason. I'm glad you realize we're on the same team here and we're trying to win. And it's human beings. Like, you're dealing with human beings all the time.
But obviously, the Gamers Are Dead articles, that wasn't the right approach to go about this, was it?
You think? No, but okay. This is something I don't think people realize, is that, like, the Gamers Are Dead articles are because the press believe that they artificially created the gamer persona. They, in hubris, thought that the gamer persona was actually something that they created as a marketing tool, and that they projected an image of the hyper-consuming, male gamer type who loves, standing in queues and lines and wearing fuzzy hats and whatnot. That's something they believe they created, and therefore, since they created, they can put it down and tell everyone else not to cater to this. They thought that they're the origin of the gamer identity. They're not, and because they, in a sense, thought they were in charge, they were told, no, you don't make the culture. It's similar to the people who do the same thing with IP. Just because Disney owns the IP, does it mean that they can do anything they want to with whatever beloved franchise we have? The answer is no. Just because they have the IP and they have the right to be the speaker for that IP does not mean that they own it and can do whatever they want to, hyperspace ramming and whatever else they want to do to destroy the lore of Star Wars or whatever IP we're talking about. So the gamers made the same hubris. Not gamers. The gaming press had the same hubris.
Why wouldn't the games press just say, "Hey, look, you know what? Some people are upset. We have maybe made some mistakes. Let's own up to them. Let's implement some reforms. Let's slap a few couple people on the wrist, and this whole thing will blow over." Why not just do that?
I don't know. I really don't. Like that would have solved everything at the very beginning. It wouldn't have blown up like it did there. It would have been over in like a week. But I honestly don't know. I mean, maybe they were all friends with each other, and I think they might have just thought that this was the moment to do it because, like, hey,
Now, obviously, you were at SPJ Airplay. I think you even got like a few seconds of speaking time. Am I mistaken on that?
Yeah, I got a few seconds in there, and the reason for it was that, well, just to let you know, like my perception of it was that SPJ Airplay at the very beginning, the first three presenters, Mark Seb, Bukhari, Alan Bukhari, and Ashkow. They were the three first presenters. They had put together a presentation and they were ready to go and roll with it. But Michael Kresge threw a wrench into the works by actually having the audience ask questions and do a back and forth on what exactly GamerGate was. So they were not able to actually. They were not prepared for a more dynamic conversation around the issues, and were taking a couple steps back. And because of that, Ren LaForme, who was the anti-GamerGate position on the other side of the panel, really started hammering them and actually making fun of them for some of the stuff they were doing. And at that point, go ahead.
Just a point of clarification. Ren LaForme, I didn't think he was anti-GG. I thought he was a neutral journalist who was analyzing this from the Institute of the Pointer Institute.
He was, but he presented more as anti.
Okay, sorry.
Like there were the three on the other side were supposedly neutral, but Ren LaForme himself was actually mocking the position of GamerGate, saying things like, if this was the case, and how come everyone's anonymous, and all sorts of questions like that. And like, you expect Gawker to be ethical, is what like you're Gawker's, you're expecting this big corporation who's known for this stuff to be ethical. He was actually saying that, and like, unfortunately, the panel on the GamerGate side were not able to deal with that kind of mockery. So basically, when Kresge opened the floor, I grabbed the mic. Well, didn't grab it, but he actually offered it to me, and I said, "Okay, I want to talk and say something," and dropped the hammer on Ren LaForme, because letting him know, like, hey, this is what they're doing. This is why people are hiding. And if you're going to mock us for this kind of stuff, like, you realize that our lives could be destroyed because we're here. And for him to dare make fun of us for all these kind of things, like, this is the reason why we're here. And pretty much dropped the mic on him and said, hey, and that actually helped turn the conversation around, because people began asking questions of it. Now that's part of the moment that I'm really proud of, is I was able to help turn the conversation around in just a few seconds. So I was really glad I was able to do that. But I was really, really mad.
Has Red reached out to you recently about this, or in the past?
Ren LaForme? No, he hasn't. But beyond Airplay, I mean, actually, there were a couple other things that happened at Airplay that I don't think you know about. But like, there was a small interview done with Games Journalism Network, who actually collapsed because of SPJ Airplay 2, which never came around. But they had a small interview with me then. And then afterwards, when the panel switched around with Milo Yiannopoulos, Christina Hoff Summers, and Kathy Young, who were talking about the more social justice end of GamerGate, there was a bomb scare, if you remember. But what happened was that as we were outside and we're gathering around, one of the editors for the Miami Herald, and the senior editor, I believe, was tweeting about how GamerGate did a bomb scare on them. And when I saw that, I went up to Michael Kresge and said, look, Michael, this is the reason why there's a problem with this, is because you have people who are in charge of these newspapers who don't even do their basic research of what this is about and what even the event is about. They don't even know that the pro GamerGate people are here, and they're blaming GamerGate for the bomb scare. And he said, well, he's right over there, the senior editor. So I ended up walking to the senior editor and explaining to him in a few seconds, like, what GamerGate's about, what we're doing there, what we're trying to talk about. And he ended up apologizing about it and actually reformatting his statement on Twitter. So those are the two major moments I was really kind of proud of at the time, because it's like, this is the kind of problem that we're having, is like low information people making all these generalized statements, following the narrative that they were told without actually doing any basic research. But that's journalism.
Now, how do you think that the SPJ Airplay event went?
I think that in terms of vindicating what GamerGate was about, it actually did its job. It actually also legitimized the fact that, yes, there were ethical violations on the part of the Gawker Network, Kotaku, and a whole bunch of others. It legitimized the fact that there should have been rules that followed, and that and I'm glad that we also pointed that it was pointed out the ethical guidelines were changed. It changed a lot of the conversation around there. However, and this is the problem that everyone realized at the very end of it, they have no actual authority to stop or fine or do other punitive damages to people in terms of, like, if they do something that's truly unethical and actually a lie in terms of newspaper or one way or another. And there was discussion about, like, what can you do, and can you actually make it an enforcement arm? And then the question is, do you want it to be an enforcement arm? Because once it's an enforcement arm, it'll push politics one way or the other, and you don't want that. So I mean, like, that's kind of like that's the problem with that. Like, how can you solve that problem? Like, yes, like, at least with the fact that we were heard and the fact that we were vindicated for what we were doing was in itself a victory and a great place to say, like, hey, like, even the SPJ has agreed that the gamers had a real issue with these things, and and the business should be reformed. But beyond that, I really don't know, like, there was anything else that could have been done. It was a good catharsis for a lot of us, but at the same time, like, what can be done going forward? And now we're 10 years later, 9 years later, we're looking at all the fake news articles and all these people doing their own narrative shifting. It's more obvious nowadays, thankfully, but, like, back then, like, at least now people are more aware, and that really is the big thing, is that the trust in media is now at the lowest point of almost all of all of polling history, and rightfully so. And I'm just thankful to be part of that, as well as the gamers who are the ones who actually made people realize the media is lying to you, and you need to really look into things yourself.
Did you have any reason to think that the bomb threat was legitimate, or have any concerns about your safety?
I had a lot of concerns about my safety, because I didn't know at what point in time this thing actually would have been real in one way or another. Because as later on, you had, like, I was actually worried. The first bomb threat I had was GG in DC. GG in DC was one of the first bigger meetups. It had Milo in it, Kathy Young, and Christina Hoff Summers over in DC. DC is pretty close to where I live, so we made a big trip up to go there. And there was a bomb threat that happened there. So I expected danger to happen at the next time, maybe even possibly a riot of some sort. Thankfully, it's not Berkeley, it was Miami, because if it was Berkeley, then there definitely would have been violence. So.
I'm actually interviewing Michael Koretsky next week. Is there anything you think I should ask him?
Oh, just tell him I said hi. I don't know if you remember me. Actually, I'd like to ask him, like, what are his thoughts now? Because now, the thing is, like, now, fake news meme came out with Trump and all-time low trust in media, and part of it, I think, like, is because of this. People weren't listening to what we were talking about. We weren't telling. We were telling them, fix yourself. Hey, the media is lying. They're not even doing basic research. If they're willing to lie about video games, what else they're willing to lie about? So if you can ask them, like, hey, what are your thoughts on, like, how trust in media has happened since then? That would be an interesting perspective, because I want to know what his thoughts are. Because for me, it's like, nobody trusts you guys anymore. We warned you. I mean, I don't want to stand on that and make, it's like, hey, you didn't listen to us. It wasn't his fault. It wasn't Michael's fault. But I wonder if he laments what's going on.
Some GamerGate supporters believe that pressuring advertisers to pull out would be a good way to convince gaming publications to initiate ethical reforms. What did you think of the strategy?
Well, it worked perfectly great. I think it actually was a good strategy. Like, do you want to be associated with this brand, such as Gawker? That was the big question, and then ended up destroying Gawker. Well, Hulk Hogan did the other half.
Do you think that by contacting advertisers and hurting these companies' bottom line, you made it less likely that they'd be willing to come to the table to negotiate?
They weren't negotiating before. Like, they thought they were invincible, and we proved that they could bleed.
Do you support well, do you? This is 10 years ago. Did you support contacting advertisers over ethical breaches only, or also in cases where they have opinions you don't like?
I don't think you remember this one, but the big one that actually won a lot of people was Bring Back Bullying from Sam Biddle. You remember that?
Yes, one of the Gawker writers advocated for bullying to come back.
Right. That actually is an opinion that I do not share, and therefore, I think that actually asking advertisers, "Do you actually agree with this opinion, and do you support handling the business?" was actually worth asking. And I think that actually did the most damage versus like unethical journalism. It actually, do you support bullying? And they said, no, we don't support bullying. Well, why in the world are you giving money to Gawker? That actually was a really good question.
Is it
So
anti?
yeah,
Go ahead.
right. So like that's the question of like corporate policy and asking them like, hey, do you support X, Y, Z? I mean, it isn't nice, but at the same time, it's actually it's accurate.
Is it anti-free speech to cost a company money because they support bullying? Isn't that a position one can hold?
Wait, say that question one more time.
Isn't supporting bullying an opinion? And therefore
Yes, it is.
censoring it anti-free speech?
I mean, you are not taking away money in the sense that you're not taking away their free speech. They're free to say anything they want, just as the company is free to support whatever people say by their money. You're not taking away money. You're actually pointing out that people may not want to support someone who's spouting a specific opinion. The money isn't owed to Gawker. It's not like we're taking it away. It's more of like, how would you put it? Do you wish to be associated with this individual?
Don't you think this sets a dangerous precedent where, oh, well, you can say whatever you want, you just can't make any money off of it, and then now you have YouTube demonetizing people, or you've got people contacting advertisers of publications over opinion pieces, things like this?
Yeah, I mean, you can make whatever and say whatever you want to make. It's just the question of whether or not people are willing to support it. That's not. I don't think that's actually a free speech issue. And like, heck, like if someone wanted to make a game where you're playing the Nazis in Wolfenstein as opposed to you killing Nazis the other way around, sure, you can make that game. It doesn't mean people are going to give you money, and it doesn't mean you're going to get a platform to sell it on. But you can make that game.
The bullying example, while real, is sort of an extreme case, an opinion so extreme that perhaps you could justify a campaign on this about a campaign to get their advertisers pulled for it. Perhaps.
Right, which is
But
where Sam really stepped in it.
but would you also support contacting advertisers if they made a feminist opinion that you didn't like?
Well, I don't think that's going to work because a lot of corporations are pro-feminist. So it really wouldn't matter.
But would you support that as a moral principle? Or would you say that that's free speech?
I mean, you could try. Like, for instance, like, I don't know if people realize this, but like, for instance, like, I'm Catholic, right? You have a Catholic organization who gives money to certain corporations and nonprofits. You can go up to them and say, hey, why are you giving, like, you're Catholic, why are you giving money to a pro-abortion group? That's a legitimate question because it goes against your own ideology. Why are you giving money to this group? So, I mean, like, you can do that based on either side of the other side of the aisle. And it does happen. I mean, like, in fact, like, it should actually happen because if you want your money for whatever corporation to go whatever causes that that you think are either beneficial, but they should be beneficial to them. Say, for instance, like there's a feminist organization giving money to a conservative Christian, conservative Christian charity. Like, yeah, you'd ask, like, hey, why are you giving the money to a anti-LGBT conservative Christian? You're a feminist organization. You really shouldn't do that. That's a legitimate question.
But when you're talking about opinions, whether that's bring back bullying at the extreme end or more moderate opinions, do you think it creates a chilling effect where publications will be less likely to publish opinion pieces that might be controversial or might be right wing or left wing or whatever, because they're afraid that advertisers will pull out because of these campaigns to get their advertisers to be removed.
Okay. Now here's okay. I'm gonna take your question and ask another question. Should journalism be a for-profit business run by a corporation with corporate money interests?
Yes, I think that there probably is a role for the private sector in journalism.
But do you think that because they take money, that their journalism is going to be biased? I mean, supposedly there's a wall between the people taking in money and the people doing the articles, but there's also a benefit to actually promoting certain advertisers because of it. Like, for instance, is it ever disclosed that whenever you're watching something from NBC, that NBC is actually owned by GE? And GE, and if any product or anything that goes by NBC has a GE product in it, there's going to be a bias in whatever GE does. That's something that people don't really think about. But yes, that NBC is the media arm of GE, and there is a kind of corporate. Even though people try to separate the two, there is always a conflict of interest that does exist that people aren't aware of. So there's a whole bunch of Fox and all these other places. They have a corporate interest in benefiting their own products and in certain corporations that they're invested in. So I mean, there is room for nonprofit, donation based. What do you call it? I even think it's better to go by donation based nonprofit press as opposed to corporate media press that has a profit motive. In fact, the profit motive for a lot of places has gotten us in a lot of trouble because, like, for instance, a lot of salacious headlines or the clickbaity headlines, top 10 reasons for XYZ, all those things come from the fact that a lot of these websites want to get eyeballs and get advertising revenue. And so the quality of the reporting goes down. Whereas people who do the subscriber model, where you actually used to buy newspapers and actually had to subscribe to them, they're more reliant on the fact of accurate news reporting as opposed to it's an advertiser eyeball based. So there's that's a big difference in terms of our model nowadays. And because our model is based on the fact that, hey, we have advertisers who are promoting eyeballs, they tend to promote more salacious headlines as opposed to real news and or anything that could be beneficial to the public. The things that make the most money are articles that make people mad. And that's part of the reason why overall there's a financial benefit in making people pissed off. And people are. And there's a financial benefit in dividing people in half and making them fight each other and sharing articles because of that. So I think that's a big problem we have right now. And I don't think you've considered it from that angle. So if you're going back to your original question, if your question is like, should we support the fact that we should stop advertisers from putting money in these places? Yes, because we need less of that kind of business.
Bringing it back to GamerGate, some critics have argued that GamerGate was mostly or entirely right-wing. Now, you've been very open about your conservative views, and I think that's fine. I think that there's a place in GamerGate. There was a place for GamerGate for conservatives and liberals to work together and have a nonpartisan movement about gaming and making gaming better. I think that's a good thing. But what do you think of this characterization? Were most of the people you worked with in GamerGate right-wing?
No. In fact, I would say that the characterization is wrong. Pretty much almost everyone I met was left, on either center left or even progressive left. I had never met, in my life, I've met more trans people than I had ever in my entire life because of GamerGate. In fact, like, I would say I would characterize myself as one of the more right-wing people, but the majority of people, if not like 90% of the people I ever met, were left-wing.
Yeah, GamerGate made me pro-trans people.
And another thing also, and just to make sure you put it here, and it might be someone you might consider for a future interview. Have you considered talking to Brad Glasgow?
I've actually reached out to him. We've been in talks.
Okay, good. Because Brad was the one who actually did that study of where do people lie in the political spectrum in terms of.
Well, there were multiple studies, but his methodology was very good. I think he did a good job.
Yeah, he's the one who actually determined where the political spectrum of GamerGate was, and I think that actually is a really good lead-in for that, because Brad was the one who did it.
Yeah. He also said he was going to write a book. I don't think that ever happened. Like, not to put the guy on blast or anything, but like he did say that, did he not?
Yeah, I think he did, but I didn't follow up, and I was kind of off Twitter for a while to actually follow up and ask him. And maybe you should ask him if you get a chance, and for me and for everyone else. Hey, have you ever considered writing that book? And I don't know if anyone would, how much people would buy out of it, but he's got his own life, so.
Do you want to talk about your political views or philosophy?
Well, I don't know if you have any questions for me on it, but like they're pertinent. But go ahead.
Have your views changed since GamerGate or because of GamerGate?
Well, I mean, I came into this as a Catholic, a very strongly believing Catholic, and I left even more so. I don't think it. I mean, if you call that a political view, because the Catholic Church tend to straddle different types of things in terms of their viewpoints. It hasn't changed in a sense, other than the fact they gave you more experience with more types of people. The internet tends to do that, so. I got to talk to all sorts of people and all walks of life, and it really, in many ways, enriched me to learn from so many people, even people who were trolls. I learned a lot from a lot of people. So, I mean, did it change anything other than the fact that I think the best thing it does is that it humanizes people. You get to talk to people who don't agree with you, and in many ways, put a person behind it. How many of those people turned out to be real? I don't know. I mean, there might have been people who were fake or bot accounts, or even like what are they called, sock puppet accounts. But I know for a lot of people who I did talk to, there were a lot of really good people I met, and I got to learn a lot from them.
Some people say that GamerGate was the first battle of the culture war. Do you have any thoughts on this framing?
I think that actually the culture war goes much older. I think we talked about it briefly, but I think the culture war goes way back. I mean, at least 600 years in my estimation. The way I would frame it is this: is that the idea is that if you take the core stories of a civilization, right? What makes up a civilization are its core mythologies and stories. And there's the myth of America and what people believe it, and there's a myth of the Western civilization. People make it the myth of the Roman Empire. So now we've 0 days since we talked about the Roman Empire. But like there's an idea of what civilization is built upon a series of stories. And around 500 years ago, there was a major dispute over how you tell that story, especially one of the key stories of Western civilization being the Bible. And one people said, well, we have the authority, and the other people said, well, no, the individual has the authority to tell that story. And it goes back to stories, doesn't it? And so the problem is like, okay, does the individual have the authority, or does the person who is designated as the author, or not the author, as the custodian, have the authority to tell the story? And that was one of the first fractures in the culture war, is that who has the right to tell the story of our civilization? Is it the audience and the people and the individual, or is it the custodian? And between that, from there, it's the next question that comes out of there. That's the Reformation, if you can't tell what I'm talking about. The next question after there is like, well, how about we all decide to hold the values of the story, like human rights and individual freedoms, but let's get rid of the story. We don't really need the story. We just need the values that it imposes on society, and that's the Enlightenment. And that's basically the framing of most of our discussion. Is like, do we need the stories? Are the stories important? Are the stories free for the individual to make up whatever they want? Is there a canon that you understand of the story? Is there a way of understanding the story that's within the canon and spirit of the story itself? All that goes back at least 600 years. And really, I think that's what we're facing in pop culture, and it goes up and down the entire chain for pretty much most of modern Western civilization history. And that's how I frame it, and that's how I look at it.
We could probably go into this for like 5 hours and
Yeah, that's
discuss
probably
whether
discussion
or
of its
not
own.
the Enlightenment requires a Christian or religious foundation. And I think I'd probably disagree with you. and it would be a very fun conversation. But we could set that
Oh,
one
no.
up maybe a different time if you want.
Okay, I would love to do that as a separate discussion. I think it'd be framed more like the Enlightenment was more of a point where it says we don't need the Christian story or foundation to have these values. That's what the argument of the Enlightenment is. It's like, hey, do we even need Christian values to hold the values of equality, fraternity, and do we need that? And that's the question that people have been asking for the last 300 or 400 years. And that's a debate on its own. But that's how I'd frame it: is that the Enlightenment was a step away from the Christian story because the Christians were so busy killing each other over who had the right to tell the story, which was the 30 Years' War and other terrible things that happened during that time. And so the Enlightenment was a step away, saying, "Hey, let's do that." And really, when it comes to the left and right really is an argument between the left tends to be the Enlightenment, the right tends to be the Protestant Reformation, and that's how the right tends to be the religious right, and the left tends to be the progressive liberal left. And that's how the framing of the left-right is, especially in America. So that's how I'd frame the entire thing, and that's a discussion in itself. But I'd love to do that some other time, and probably outside the scope of GamerGate. So
Yeah, what does that have to do with ethics in games journalism?
yeah, it actually it does because of postmodern theory and the idea of who owns the IP. It's not ethics in games journalism, but it has to do with the second argument of GamerGate, which is what do we do with people, with IP owners, the social justice? How do you tell a story without imposing your ideology, religion in it? That is the bigger question, which I didn't think the hashtag could take. That's a bigger question outside that point in time because it's a 400, 500 year story that people still haven't figured out yet, and we're in the middle of it.
Did you interact with anyone on the anti-GamerGate side?
Well, plenty of people. There was a really great artist, and I wish I remember her name. She drew the picture of Vivian James and Lillian Woods sitting down over Christmas the first year of GamerGate, and just sitting down playing video games. She did that, and I talked to her, and she was such a great person. I joked around with the Man in Black, so like I actually did a 3D model of his little pixelated thing because I kind of figured he was one of the people who was okay with it. At the time, Ian Miles Chong was anti-GamerGate and eventually became GamerGate. I talked to him, I just tweeted him a few times. I didn't talk to him directly.
Well, he was
Probably
a pure grifter, right? He grifted the far left social justice people, and then he tried to grift the anti-social justice warrior people, and now he's trying to grift like the Trump right.
And that's where I'm like, I really don't like you, Ian, but but so I mean, either case, I did like the fact that at least he kind of admitted that whatever was going on with all the stuff going with the games journalism, he admitted that at least there was a problem. As far as where he went with that, it's sort of like everyone else who sort of went their own separate ways at GamerGate. They, whatever. I mean, I don't really care about that part, but it's like it's all on them. What they chose to do with it. For me, I just chose to be quiet, focus on my family, and focus on that part. So yeah, and coming out to say hi to you. So in any case, the other person I integrated, I think at great length in anti-GamerGate was Sarah Nyberg. And basically, she was probably the most dishonest person I talked to because as I tried to talk to her, she would reframe everything I said and repost it and completely recontextualize anything I said and reframing it as something totally either misogynistic or saying things like, "Oh yeah, you're dismissing people suffering and all sorts of things." I'm like, that's not what I meant. And that. But she decided to do that because that was her thing, was taking people's posts out of context and reframing it, showing that GamerGators were terrible people. So.
And obviously, there were allegations, but we don't have to get into those.
No, but
yeah,
there are a lot.
Let's move on.
I think the worst people, the worst actors on both sides, kind of have eaten a lot of crow for what they've done, and that's probably the thing that over the years I've sort of looked at and said, someone needs to do something about that. And I said, but if we wait long enough, they'll hang themselves, and a lot of them have. Well, metaphorically speaking.
In Minecraft.
Yeah, in Minecraft. No, but what I mean. Like for instance, Feminist Frequency is over. It's like All right.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure the jokey hang themselves is going to translate into text as well as it does over voice. Like you were obviously joking, to be clear. Or you were
Well,
using it
yeah,
metaphorically, yeah.
I was using it metaphorically speaking. I did not mean that.
Yeah.
I
So,
kind of thought about it. I'm like, wait a minute. There are some people who might have done that. I don't remember.
are you gonna get me in touch with the Man in Black? I sent him a
No,
DM, but I don't think he read it.
no. And after I destroyed my Twitter account, I lost contact with pretty much everybody, and only with a small handful of people I was talking to on Discord. But that's it. Like it was like maybe 5 people I talked to. Because remember at that time, I really didn't know how many people were actually real. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to hang on to the people I know for certain who are genuine individuals who I know I could talk to, and I also focus on all my in real life relationships because with the head job that I had at that point, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna leave Twitter alone because you don't know who really is real out there.
Did you ever change anyone's mind on a GamerGate?
Well, there was a bunch of people I talked to that they're moderated in terms like the main thing is that they didn't say what they stopped on saying it was a harassment campaign, and they knew that it was simply certain individuals who were being just jerks. So that's how I moderated. But a lot of the focus for especially anti-Gamergate was the fact that by default, I think this is the stance that really it really comes down to a priority assumption, which is that the gaming industry is dominated by white patriarchy, and that's something that you can't really, if you by default believe that this is the default of society, that's a much deeper conversation than simply ethics in games journalism, and or if Gamergate happens to be a bunch of harassers. That's a much deeper issue in terms of changing their idea. But the ideas that could change, like like making it more nuanced and who's involved and who's harassing, and that there are ethical issues. And no, it's not about Zoe Quinn being a woman. That's not that was never an issue. It was the fact that Nathan Grayson was using his position to help a friend. It was Grayson who was the main issue, but they always made it about the women. It's like, no, it's not about them.
What do you think that? Obviously, when the stuff before the Gamers Dead articles came out, when you had these scandals, some of which were very legitimate games journalism scandals, but also it seemed like there was a lot of people getting involved because they wanted to talk about the drama. You had a bunch of YouTubers wanting to run drama videos about this, and you obviously had 4chan's Burgers and Fries chat room. Do you think that this kind of language that they use, like burgers and fries in the videos and stuff like that, was sexist language?
No, I don't think so. I
Well,
mean,
because they were one, making jokes about Quinn and not Grayson, and two, because the joke, quote unquote, was that she had slept with 5 people, like the restaurant Five Guys Burgers and Fries.
okay. Well, the reason why, and I think people don't take into account why Quinn was, in a sense, the bigger, more salacious target, is because Quinn had a much longer string of destructive relationships that people could pull out in terms of drama, and like Grayson being one of the last in terms of many other things. Like if you talk to anyone who knew her back in when she was involved, I think in the Toronto game development scene, there's a lot of drama that she caused there. And the thing that's where I think people don't realize, like, it's not just simply that there's like all her past with not only the game developers but also like just relationships, modeling. There was a lot more material, and so in terms of that, like that made it more, I guess, clickbaity and more quote unquote entertaining to the drama people who are watching. Especially like was an internet aristocrat who brought a lot of these things up to up on the surface. So was it sexist? No, because goodness gracious, how many people online do drama videos on men? Like Chris Chan,
But
arguably.
using sure, look, obviously anybody who's involved in online controversy in any way is going to have like tons of drama channels and stuff covering them, including some, including like some really weird stuff. But do you
Yeah.
think that using that specific kind of language, like burgers and fries specifically, is sexist because it's obviously a reference to her sleeping around with allegedly 5 people, one of whom was Nathan Grayson, but the other 4 were just like rando people who she allegedly cheated on her boyfriend with. But like, why is that anyone else's business? Why should anybody care about that?
I mean, you could argue that it is, and you could say that, and I think some people actually legitimately made it out. And I think it was not Grayson, it was Aaron Joni who did that, who called it Five Guys Burgers and Fries because he was talking about the 5 guys who she cheated on him with. Aaron, if you don't know, Aaron is the ex that was cheated on by Zoe. I think he was the one who actually coined it and actually was trying to get that going, and it was picked up by the YouTubers. So I mean, you would pin that especially on Aaron if you want to say that's sexist or not. But at the same time, like, Aaron's a big feminist, and I think it was just trying to get virality and to make a joke out of it. I mean, that's the problem. Like, when you start attributing this is sexist, this is racist, you're attributing a motive, and I don't know what the motive was behind the creation of that hashtag. And I believe it was Aaron who created it. So no, I mean, I think that's the problem with the charges of racism, sexism, homophobia, is a charge on the subjective what we call it, subjective intentions of the person doing something, and that's very difficult. That's very difficult to prove.
Do you think that people, aside from the fact that one of the people was a games journalist, and obviously that had very serious implications given his article that promoted her game over 49 others, aside from that aspect of it, why should anybody give a shit about any of this other person's personal life, whether it's Joni or Quinn or whoever the fuck? Like, I don't care about. I see all these YouTubers too, and streamers,
Oh, yeah.
people in my space who are always talking about like, oh, this celebrity had a big breakup, and now there's like these juicy texts that got leaked. And like, why do people give a shit? Why should we care?
I also forgot a couple other things that she did. She also crashed another feminist fundraising campaign.
The Find Young Capitalist referring to? Allegedly,
yeah,
she did. I don't know about the details of that specific story.
There was also a big TV show that was supposed to be a Game Jam TV show, where she accused the producer of being sexist. I believe people like JonTron were involved in this game show. It was a game. If you look it up, there was a big game show she was supposed to be a part of, where people were supposed to develop a game. And so what the director was doing was questioning why Quinn was even part of the team, because she doesn't have any talent. Because he didn't see her program or do anything like that, and so he was questioning her, and then she brings out the big sexist card as her defense, and then eventually it became a big thing where a whole bunch of like developers were like, we're not going to do this show because the guy's being sexist to Zoe, and ended up destroying the TV show. There's a whole bunch of drama that I remember reading about and listening to that Zoe was involved even before like the whole GamerGate exploded. Like, she was getting headline after headline with how much she was trying to get attention on herself and whatever she was making. So that's part of the story, I think. But going back to your question, like the reason I wanted to bring that up because I remember there was a lot of stuff that she was involved in, really crashed a lot of stuff and made a lot of enemies, more than just simply this whole thing going on with Aaron. So there's a whole enemies list of people who are interested in actually getting back at her. I don't think people realize that either. When
you say getting back at her, what do you mean? Like harassing her on the internet?
No, not necessarily harassing, but basically seeing her basically seeing her receive her comeuppance in one way or another. Not necessarily harassing her, but in a sense for people to see who she truly is as a person. Because, crashing the Toronto game development scene, crashing all these different game shows, destroying the Find Young Capitalist, supposedly, and that's what the claim was, and that's what people, believed. Like, I believed it. I believe that she actually did it because of what I saw, what she was saying, and because that's why they got no oxygen from the press, is because she declared the Find Young Capitalist to be sexist, even though they're a feminist group. So there's that background. But going back to your question again. Can you restate it one more time so I can make sure I got it?
Do you think it was sexist to use this kind of quote-unquote like slut-shaming language?
I think slut-shaming is framing it in the wrong way. I think it's just, here's a bunch of things that this person did that were terrible. It has nothing to do with the fact that she's sleeping around. Everything I mentioned that happened before the Five Guys thing are things that she also blew up that had nothing to do with sex, at least to our knowledge.
what do you think of Not Your Shield, which was created in response to people claiming that GamerGate supporters are only white men?
Because, as I said before, I thought Not Your Shield was necessary. And one of the reasons why is because, hey, you guys are having ethical violations. This is not a social justice issue. You can't hide behind the fact that that there are women who are being attacked or anything like that. You can't say that everyone who's attacking you are only white men. No, you guys are just assholes. You're not telling the truth, and it has nothing to do with anything having to do with social justice. That was the original reasoning behind the Not Your Shield hashtag. And I think it was a necessary one. But also, that's part of the reason why the later discussion about the social justice angle for GamerGate was a no-go from the start, because of that. And that's what made it difficult to say, like, we're going to talk about social justice now, because really the kicker was a bunch of unethical people trying to shield themselves behind the fact that they happen to be pro-feminist, pro-women. That's the kind of thing that they were trying to hide behind. So
How could the GamerGate conversation have been more productive?
that relied on the journalists. Unfortunately, it couldn't have been. I mean, there were individuals who reached out and talked to people, and people like yourself who actually go out and actually have these conversations and made it a lot better. People reaching out to Anti-Gamergate and just one by one having good conversations. But on the journalist part, the fact that they were not even part of the conversation or even want to be part of the conversation in SVJ Airplay speaks volumes in itself. There couldn't have been a better way when the other party doesn't even want to show up, because we are in a sense beneath them, and they know they can't. They know there's no reason to show up because they're guilty. So what's going to happen?
All right, now we've talked about this a little bit before, but obviously you talked about why the games press decided to make the whole conversation about sexism and harassment rather than about what you perceive Gamergate as having actually been about. But
Mm-hmm.
why did some people believe this story that Gamergate people were sexist or harassers?
Oh, the power of the press. I mean, simply put, they have the power of the microphone. And not only that, but then you have like the major media like BBC, MSNBC, the CBC, like a whole bunch of all those broadcasting companies up and down the whole way. Like they all had the microphone and framed it as such. So what power does the rest of us have? I
No,
mean,
go ahead.
go ahead. I mean, over time, yeah, sure. Like it eventually bore out in time, but it still, they still have the microphone and they like to use it. 9 years later, they're still using it.
Now, you were part of the Gamergate harassment patrol, so is it safe to say that condemning harassment was very important to you?
No, it was, yes. If you remember, if I don't know, there was a whole bunch of people who actually said, "I support Gamergate. I condemn harassment." People, made memes of that and retweeted all over the place and made a big deal out of it, because we want to make sure people knew, and it couldn't be, and told the press, "Hey, this is not what we're doing."
Do you think that the Gamergate community at large did a good job condemning harassment on their side or by third-party trolls?
Yes, I think they did, and some people were directly doxxed and harassed because they stood up against it.
Yeah, I
Because
was
they
too.
were, yeah. So, but they did the best they could, and thankfully, and I'm very thankful for everything they did. It was crazy, the number of people who were just trying to make it even worse.
Now,
The
with
fact
the go ahead.
that the fact that gamers stood up and said, "No, we're not going to do this. We're not going to let you push us into doing anything more extreme. We're not going to do this kind of violent thing, even though you're hurting us." And we know it's not anti-Gamergate doing it. There's a lot of like trolls doing it. In fact, that was actually the most impressive part. Is like a whole bunch of people would identify them as third-party trolls, not anti-Gamergate trolls. They were third-party trolls,
Yeah,
and that I think was really responsible.
and it's this is an aspect of the conversation I'm not delved into too much in these interviews, but we all know that there were so many of these trolls, these third-party trolls, who very much wanted to just fuck with everybody. And like we know these people's names even. Like they weren't even trying to hide who they were. They wanted to brag about how many people they doxed on both sides. They wanted to build a reputation as like someone you should be afraid of on the internet, and they were very open about who they were.
Mhm.
And we could talk about names, but I sort of have a policy where I don't name third-party trolls because I don't want to give them the attention. Like
Yeah, I
if
wouldn't
they if
either.
they end up in a book, if they end up in a book, like holy cow, right? Like they finally made it, right? That's like the ultimate troll on their part. They'll feel like they succeeded. It was all worthwhile because they got their name in a freaking book. So I don't want to give them that gratification and like justify their behavior to themselves in their eyes.
Yeah. Not only that, but like for me, it's like a lot of it's water under the bridge, and hopefully they moved on with their lives and
No,
actually don't.
dude, they haven't. They're still obsessed, dude. I swear, it's true. A
Oh
lot of
well.
them are still are. Well, yeah. Well, and
Hmm.
obviously we talked about GG Revolt a little bit. You think that GG Revolt, this sort of like breakaway group, that they had some interesting points to make?
I think that was from GG Revolt that I got what they called the Titan Post. The Titan Post, I don't know if you're familiar with it, was a dissertation and had a whole bunch of Attack on Titan pictures on it, which is why it's called the Titan Post. But for people who don't know what it was about, basically it was a reasoning that how the gaming press was causing people to get into silos, to talk in small communities, and not be able to get their wider word out about the kind of problems that were being caused by media, localization problems, people doing censorship, creative freedom problems, and how they were sweeping away Gamergate underneath all the noise and just say this was just an isolated thing and make us disappear and no longer talk about it, discourage us from doing these things, and slowly just the narrative will simply they'll regain control and will not be able to do anything about it because we're too busy in our own circle jerk. That was one of the main things I think that I took out of Gamergate Revolt, and they had a lot of those really interesting opinions on how those things were being used and how the gamers were actually how Gamergate was being isolated on the internet, especially with like a lot of Twitter tactics in terms of censorship, which we later found out to be true in terms of the algorithm, which is what we found out with the Twitter files from Elon Musk. But yeah, like Gamergate Revolt as a dissenting voice I thought was really important. And I, even though there were a lot of disagreeable people on there, I think that their opinions were actually very valid.
Did you have any thoughts on Zack Attack?
I don't recall the name. If you can give me more context.
The group that tried to dox Mombot, and then they had the logs leaked.
I mean, other than the fact that I think they were terrible. I mean, like there is a bunch. I remember Mobot being doxxed, but I don't remember who was
Well, it was
responsible for it.
It was a fake dox. The whole thing was actually a fake dox that Mombot and Rudderhouse created to try and see if they would dox her or not, and they did try to dox her. But
Yeah, I think I was largely gone from the internet when this kind of stuff was happening, and
you
I'm
know what?
glad that
That might
Mobot.
have been after you disappeared. That's right.
But I'm glad that Mobot's okay because I remember for several years, like, well, not only did the account get banned, but that Mobot herself is okay, and that it didn't turn out to be anything bad.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think that GG Revolt in the beginning, they might have had a couple of good things. Like they did want to really go after e-celebs, and the idea was, well, this is going to be GamerGate without any of the optics, basically, right? Without any rules, without any optics, without any pure free speech, basically.
Yeah,
But
I think
I think what that very quickly ended up becoming though was a legitimate harassment campaign. And we saw them go after people like Alice and Rap. We saw them go after the Hat Man. We saw them go after me. We saw them go after you. Like, I'm not sure if you were aware, but a lot of those people who fucked with you after you had your meltdown. No offense on the meltdown. I should phrase that better. When you had your incident, a lot of those people who fucked with you,
that's fine. You can
they
call it
were
meltdown. It's
GG
fine.
Revolt people posting on the board and about you at that time, and they those same people on Twitter were the ones going after you.
See, I think
Now there was
that
a bigger backlash than just them, of course, because like I was upset, a lot of people were upset, but they were part of the backlash too.
I think that was part of the nature, unfortunately, of GG Revolt. The nature of GG Revolt was to allow every dissenting voice to talk, and many of the dissenting voices included those third-party trolls who could re-infiltrate.
You know,
And
but
so it's like we want to put a place where there's no gatekeeping for everyone to have a voice, because there's no gatekeeping. What do you end up with? And that's like the double edge of the sword. So it's not like that's why it didn't surprise me that that's what happened with it later on, and that's what the kind of people are involved in there. At the same time, like the need for a dissenting voice I think it was very valuable. And so it's like one of those, like, how do you deal with either way? The Celeb, I think, to frame it in terms of like your book, like, or other people to understand, the Celeb problem is that there are certain voices that end up becoming too powerful, where dissenting voices also need to have their idea to break up the groupthink. And there's too many people. It's so easy to become the simp for bigger voices who are actually more articulate, or who are able to give your ideas more of a voice. That's why certain people like Sargon of Akkad became very much like a great a bigger voice, is because he was able to articulate, and he showed his face. He allowed people to have feel like there was somebody out there who voiced their kind of opinion in a way that they were able to who could express their opinion in such a way. Plus, he also has a British accent, which makes our colonials look up to him already. So that's like the thing. Like, there's a lot of people who in many ways won the merit of being able to be the e-celeb because of the way they're able to articulate ideas. At the same time, you need to have breakup of groupthink. So it's like you need to live between the two tensions, and unfortunately, like, that's something that that's just the nature of the internet. And I think, in my opinion, I think there was value on both sides, which is why I ended up talking to them, and unfortunately, to my detriment, trusting people who should have earned my trust, because they were a dissenting voice, not necessarily a safe voice.
yeah, I was willing to talk with them too in the beginning, and I don't know if you know that this was after you left GG pretty much. Oh, actually no, this was about that time, I guess, maybe slightly after you left. But I ran the GamerGate Discord server, the main one where obviously anyone can make a Discord server, and there's no leader in GamerGate, so people can make their own. But like, this was a very active Discord server for the GamerGate movement, and I talked with those people at first, and I thought, hey, look, here is a dissenting voice, but it's so quickly. I feel like this always happens anytime you have like 100% free speech with no restrictions. It so quickly becomes like the worst actors dominating the space, and then like normal people just say, fuck it, I'm out. And I feel like that's exactly what happened with GG Revolt, because I gave them a chance at the very beginning, but it became very clear that they weren't. You need to have those gatekeepers, I think. And when I was in the Discord, when I was moderating the Discord, those people became the biggest issue, because these people would always try to start fights over every single thing, every single day, and you just had
And
to
then make you
had to nuke them basically. It was just I had to ban them, ban a large number of them. Which, I mean, it was like probably like 5 or 6 people, but they're 5 or 6 people who would, on the Discord, that's specifically, there was about 60 people I think altogether in GGR, but they were extremely, extremely, extremely hostile. And that's fine if you want to criticize e-celebs, I'm all for that. But when you start talking about like you actually want to harass people, that's when you're going too far. Or if you want to make excuses for that kind of behavior, that's going too far.
No, I agree. I mean, but that again, like, I mean, that we got a wide swath of human beings throughout the whole year and a half, 2 years. We want to extend this further, like how, because I think in your book you ended at 2016. For me, it was much sooner, but like, we got a huge number of different kind of people in this thing involved, just trying to make a mess of things, and some people trying to do good things. I mean, I actually even made a joke that the fact that any good came out of this, and that there was some movement and there was some positive things that came out of it isn't a miracle. Is a miracle in itself. I mean, I think in other interviews you're talking about like how the job isn't done. There's a lot more to do. But from my framing of my context, this is a long time in coming in terms of what we're dealing with in terms of problems and how to solve it. So I mean, it's much bigger than that respect, and I think that we can, the fact that we got through this and at least a little bit of truth was able to shine through, is in itself an accomplishment. It's so hard, and it takes so much, and I'm damn proud of being part of it, and talking with you about it, and you fighting to also speak for the truth up to now, and in our own ways, like my own ways, like I still want to try to do my own way of like having like my own little catharsis about this and telling its story in its own way. But again, it has to be done in the right way and the right story, without being overbearing, without putting in ideology, but just simply telling a good story. And that's what really matters, is that because the story in itself is an amazing story if you really think about it. It's a whole bunch of regular, ordinary people trying to tell the truth and willing to stand up for against the media establishment, against a giant, and causing it to trip.
What have you thought about doing any projects like a book or anything like that about GamerGate?
I do, and I mean, if I end up doing it, I'll probably be doing it semi-anonymously, if not anonymously. But honestly, like I don't want to do it in such a way that like, in fact, like I have such sympathy for pretty much everyone on every side about this whole thing, because it's more complicated than just simply the right side and the wrong side. Heck, I would like to make some of these journalists into sympathetic characters. Like a lot of them were just protecting their friends, and they had no idea how big this was going to get. So it's like that's another way of framing it. As I said at the very beginning, like Zoe Quinn herself, like is a victim of a system that tended to favor the what do you call it, the idea of having a casting couch. People haven't framed it that way. No one talked about it that way, but that's actually it's a truth of it. Is that the only way that maybe she figured she'd get attention is by doing that? I mean, I don't know. That could have been that's part of her story, and that's something that's for her to tell. I'm not gonna say that she's a vicious person. She made a mess of a lot of things, but if you look at it, it's like she's also a person in pain. And all these third party trolls, for whatever they're going through, I really hope they find something meaningful in their life.
You think that that's the answer, this sort of deep empathy?
Yes and no. And that's one thing that GamerGate also taught me. I think that's one thing that going back to something that's changed in me, is also learning that there are people out there who want to see the world burn, who want to see things get worse, who want to see people in pain. That's something like, contending on that level of evil, because there are people who do want that, and recognizing that and coming face to face with it, the people who want to actually hurt me and my family, and, people who are good people out there who are trying to do good. That's also another factor in it. But at the same time, like I also have to hold that tension. And that's the part that I also recognize. Hold the tension, the fact that there may still be a way out for them, and to hope that for them. It's hard. And honestly, like, when people are posting pictures of your family and your house and you're talking about your kids, like they got in front of me, I don't know what I'd do. At the same time, like I also have to hold hope for them. Because, I mean, you and I may disagree on this one, but I think that, come what may, like we're all going to be judged on how we face the truth, and if we spoke it and if we did what was right. I wouldn't want to be in their shoes.
You talk about the truth a lot, and I have adopted this sort of radical honesty in my own life. I try to, at least, and I think I generally do a good job. It's a relatively recent phenomenon. Not that I was like a constant liar in the past, but like, I mean, I guess in some way I was. We all were. Everybody. I feel like so many people lie all the time, and like just small lies, even like people lie when it's convenient for them. Like, oh, why were you late? And you're like, oh, I was stuck in traffic. When the reality is like, no, you just like left your house late because you didn't really give a shit about this meeting too much, or like whatever. But people lie about stuff all the time, and I've tried to adopt this honesty in my life after reading Sam Harris's book, and I've just made a conscious effort to try and to be a better person. And I feel like, well, not be a better person necessarily, but like to tell the truth, except in cases where like the extreme scenario of like the Nazis are asking you for the Jews, right, where the Jews are at. But like barring extreme cases where your life or livelihood is on the line, I think it's important to be honest with people, and I don't I don't see a lot of this in society. And it's like the more honest you become, the more you see how often other people lie all the time, just casually, because they don't want to hurt other people's feelings, or because they think that if they tell the truth, it'll make them look bad or whatever.
I think this is something that, especially even as a Catholic, a lot of Catholics miss this, and it's something they don't realize what they're doing. At the very beginning of Mass, they say that I have greatly sinned. I've missed the mark in my thoughts and my words and what I've done and what I've failed to do. To take radical ownership for everything and realize that the reason there's a problem in the world is because you haven't done what you're supposed to do. And you admit that in front of everyone, in front of the people next to you, and say, it's my fault. The reason why the world is this. Take radical ownership and say, it's my fault. And now I want to start again. Help me. I want to start again. I will help you. You help me. We'll start again. And be radically honest with the fact that the reason there's problems in the world is because I did it. I missed the mark. And people miss that. People repeat the words, but they don't really think about it. And that's the kind of honesty we have to be with each other. Like, hey, I need to take ownership of this. So I'm kind of glad that, in your life, and, and also I'm kind of glad that in your own way, you were holding me accountable for something you thought I was doing wrong. And I don't blame you for that at all.
Well, I quote unquote blame myself because I approached it very poorly.
Well, I did too. I did too. And look, we both were aiming at the truth. And now, years later, we can look at it and go, man, that was dumb. But hey, because we're aiming at the truth, we're here.
All right.
That's really what matters. I missed the mark. You missed the mark. Okay, great. Let's get back and do it again.
Let's learn from it. All right. So you don't have to talk about it, but did you experience any harassment during GamerGate from either side or from third-party trolls?
It was all the third party stuff. I think you and I know who was responsible. I'm not going to name any names as well. And really came down to was just probably the worst of it, and I don't think it was even harassment. It was mostly just, this is the way I would frame it, and this is why people say it's harassment. When I said, we'll do the end the GamerGate hashtag thing, it wasn't harassment. It was a whole bunch of people giving me negative feedback, and it wasn't, they weren't intending to do that, but the negative feedback does affect you really greatly, and it can feel like people are attacking you personally. So that's what it is. It's not harassment. It's just people giving you negative feedback. And so, that was probably the worst of it. But in terms of personal, going after you and your kids, we can name who those people are, and they already were taken care of, and they have their own problems at the moment. So I'm not really worried about them. They have a lot going on for them right now. So,
do you have any thoughts on the term sea lioning?
I love the sea lion.
I love the sea lion too.
And it was Ethics, the sea lion, who we adopted. I was listening to you talk to Pac about that yesterday, and yeah, I remember Ethics. And I love that term, and because and even if you look at the comic, people are laughing at it. It's a polite sea lion comes around saying, "Hey, we want to discuss something with you." And
yeah,
you make
go ahead.
Yeah, it's like a cute sea lion who wants to say, "Hey, we want to talk to you about this. Leave us alone, please." It's no, but you discussed this thing, and it's really polite. Sea lion, and I'm like, that's us. It may be a little obnoxious, but it's at least polite.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because that sea lion comic is like a Rorschach test, because people on our side were like, well, aside from the part at the end where the sea lion's in her house, aside from that part, the sea lion's in the right. Whereas people on the other side are like, this is exactly what those stupid fucking GamerGate harassers do all the time to us. It's like, but that's not like a bad thing.
No, you guys are talking in a public space, and we can see it, and we'd like to talk to you about it. And have you heard about our Lord and Savior Vivian James?
Exactly. Well, I was told the other day by somebody that during GamerGate I was always trying to spread the good news about GG. That I was the pastor of GamerGate practice. I'm like, oh my god. I think actually, sorry, I just shouldn't. I know you're a Christian. I shouldn't use the Lord's name in vain, I guess, in front of you out of politeness. But if anybody, I think you're the pastor of GamerGate.
Hold a second. All right.
All right, welcome back.
Yeah. So I got to put the kids to bed and everything. So.
No, you're good, man. We can probably wrap things up relatively soon. We've already talked about the media. Why do you think that the mainstream media, not just the games press where they're all corrupt with each other, but why do you think like the mainstream media basically said the same thing that the games press said about GamerGate?
It simply fits the narrative. That there's a narrative of oppressing white people and patriarchy type stuff. I mean, like, whether or not you agree with it or not, that it fits a story.
Did you reach out to any journalists or media outlets who wrote articles about GamerGate to correct misinformation?
I think I told you a story about the editor of Miami Herald, which happened in SVJ Airplay.
Yes. Yeah. Was that
Kathy
the only
Young
example?
Talked to me. Yeah, that Kathy Young talked to me directly for a small interview. Other than that, that was pretty much it.
Okay. And no, wait, you were like a major figure in GG, dude. You were bigger. You were way bigger than me, probably in terms of like your influence within the movement, even. Like, at least on the ethics side, you were. I was more on the creative freedom, but like you were a pretty big figure in GG. Didn't no journalists reach out to you?
No, that was really it, and thankfully that was it.
But isn't it wild that like you and like Mark, Seb, and Nicole, and Mombot, and me, and all these other people, like there were some major people who easily any journalist who wanted to find out about GG could reach out to, and like they largely didn't even remotely try to ask us for our side of the story. Like that's wild.
No, I mean it was a little. The thing is, like, again, you have low information people trying to write an article about something. They already have an established narrative. They already have the resources in Wikipedia and a few other places. Why would they bother talking to actual source material? Like, that's really the problem. And like, and especially if you're trying to get this thing out and it's for clicks. Like, really, they have no incentive. Like, again, as I said to you at the very beginning, those who are interested in learning the truth will learn the truth. Those who are not, are not.
If a journalist or games journalist who covered GamerGate is reading this book right now, do you have anything you want to say to them?
Well, basically,
Sorry, and got it wrong. I should have added. If they covered GamerGate and got it wrong, do you have anything you want to say?
Well, all I can say is just look deeper, ask questions about why, and if you were one of the people who are accused about these things, like, I'm glad you fixed your ethics policies and that you've actually started changing those things. And I think that, I mean, other than that, like, that I think was pretty much it. Like, for those who those who work in journalism, seek the truth and speak it. Don't just simply take everyone else's word for granted.
What do you think that the media can learn from how they covered GamerGate? The mainstream press, that is.
I don't think they've learned their lesson, and I think that's something you have to ask Koretsky. Because Koretsky, I think himself would actually know much deeper, and like how much the press has not learned. And unfortunately, now like was it 20% of people believe the mainstream media nowadays? Like it's just, I don't know how else to fix it. At this point, it's going to come from individuals who are willing to tell the truth and speak it. But that's a story for another day, and that's their story to tell.
Have you seen the Wikipedia article on GamerGate?
Oh yeah, many times over. I know it's wrong. Best place to look is Know Your Meme.
Would you like to see the narrative on GamerGate change?
You know, as you said, it's a was it, how do you pronounce it? Rorschach?
Rorschach test?
Rorschach. It's a Rorschach test. People who want to know will know. You know, they'll find out.
Well,
I mean, and people who simply believe what the media tells them, well, that's on them.
you say that, but a lot of the resources and stuff that GamerGate people created on the internet is disappearing. Like the wiki from Deep Freeze is breaking, and
Well, that's why I'm here. That's why I'm talking to you, because, you know, you're part of it. You want to renew, in a sense, like the story, tell the truth, and do your own thing with it. Like, as I said to you, like, you know, I don't know what part I have to play. I don't know if I do, but I, you know, support people like you who are willing to dig and talk on both sides. I mean, I hope you find someone on the other side to tell their story
I've
to.
got 2 or 3 people. I want to get more, but 2 of them are doing text-only interviews where I'm just sending them the questions and they're sending me the answers, which that's okay. One of them said that if the text interview goes well, they might do voice, and then I've got another person who's interested and probably would do voice, but we'll see how that goes.
Well, if they want to, they can listen. They can listen. I'd like to hear what they said to say, because more than anything, I think we should listen to each other.
You attended a GamerGate meetup in Washington, right?
Yeah, DC.
What was that like?
Well, it was a whole bunch of people, and I think Milo got it on with somebody that night. Otherwise, like it was pretty interesting meeting a whole bunch of real life people. They were all from the East Coast, and I think that it was a sense like a big relief to know that, you know, here are some real life people who are doing these things. But other than that, it was mostly like just toasting and drinks and laughter, and then going back home. It really wasn't a big deal, other than the fact that, you know, hey, you're not a, or like the joke, are you a sock puppet or not? But no, they were real people.
Has your conscious experience as a human been made worse to any degree because of the negative narrative about Gamergate?
No, I don't think so. I mean, if you want me to elaborate further, as I said, like I keep telling you again, I think I might end up repeating myself over and over. It's like, you want to know the truth, you know those who seek it.
What's your favorite video game?
Dark Souls, and particularly because, particularly because, like it helped me recover from that. Like it's a game about triumphing over some of the worst circumstances.
Do you have any thoughts on Vivian James or Gamergate related art projects?
I made about 3 pieces on Vivian James. I will not tell you which ones they are.
Have I used them in my videos before?
I don't know, actually.
Probably. For better or worse, I used tons of Vivian James art in my older videos before, and they're all gone now, but I used tons of art. And a lot of it was uncredited because a lot of it was deliberately anonymous. The idea was you know how it was. The idea was, this isn't my art. This is for the movement. This is for the cause. This is for everybody.
That's why I won't tell you. That's why I won't tell you which ones are mine.
But I also think it's fine to take credit for it. Like if you had a portfolio and you're like, hey, look, this is my art. I'm proud of this. I want to show it off. I think that's fine too.
Yeah, I'm not doing that, man. This is something that is her. She's her own thing.
What was your favorite moment during GamerGate?
That's an interesting question. Oh, well, I can give you a funny one.
Sure, shoot.
RavenCon, you know that one?
No, actually.
That's where Brianna Wu confronts Ethan Ralph.
Well, Ethan Ralph was a legit harasser who did harass Brianna Wu, and I have proof of that too. By the way, I can show you. So.
But you know the video of her throwing him out of the con.
Vaguely, yeah.
There's a video of her like looking at her phone, finding out that Ethan Ralph had tweeted about her at RavenCon. She looks up and sees him and throws him out of the con.
Yeah, you know, I don't really see that as funny actually, because Ralph is a legit piece of shit, and he did legit harass Brianna Wu, and now that he's like meeting her in person, like that's bullshit. Yeah, I'm with Brianna Wu there.
So I thought when I was there, I was actually there. I'm like, oh my gosh, that was such a tense moment.
You were at the con.
Oh yeah, I was there.
What did you guys talk? You and Wu or?
No, I didn't. I actually listened to her presentation. She talked about Jace Connors as an actual harasser, but everyone knows that Jace Connors is a comedian.
Oh yeah, he did the stupid video where he pretended he crashed his car. That was such a fucking stupid thing. But he wasn't a
Yeah,
GamerGate guy. He was just some rando dude who was a comedian on YouTube.
right. And that's exactly what happened, and that's what she used as part of her presentation. But I was there for the presentation. I didn't talk to her though, but she's really tall.
You know, actually, let's explore that a little bit.
I don't really have the time, man. Actually, I had to run,
Okay, all right.
but I could talk to you about it in a separate thing if you want to just talk about
How many?
philosophy. But otherwise, no.
Okay. Well, hey, what do you think of the project?
I really do hope that your project does well, in the sense of just at least even in just sense as a written record of like all the people you're interviewing and talking about their experiences. And you know, I really appreciate you looking for the truth for in everyone and taking the time to actually talk and have discussions. So, if anything, man, like I wish you the best. And between the both of us, like I'm glad of everything that happened. And you know, if you want to hang out sometime and play Stellaris, let me know.
All right, man. You have a good one. Have a good night. Thanks for
You
doing
too.
this, by the way.
You're welcome. And now I got to get my family to bed. All right.
All right, take care.
Take care.
All right. Well, thank you to Paolo for doing the interview. That was great. I guess something happened in real life. He had to get pulled away real quick. But you know, that's life. I could tell he was wanting to wrap things up for like the last 20 minutes, but I was hoping to get a couple last questions in, but no worries, no worries. Worst case scenario, I could maybe shoot him a message, and maybe he'll answer him over text sometime if he's got the time. Okay, well, thanks for watching. I had pretty good viewership there, actually. We had 4 people on YouTube. We had 8 people on Kick for like a while. Like a while we did. And now we're down to 4 on Kick. It's the end of the stream, though. And Twitch is pretty much dead. Nobody on Twitch. 1 viewer. That's probably me on Twitch. Cool. All right. Well, hey, no, thanks for watching, everybody. Let's see who we're going to raid. Hey, Stitch and Adam are live.
No. Wait.
I'm not sure if Stitch allows redirects, though. I've not talked to him. Oh, he does. Okay, cool. And then Twitch will do action points. We'll rate action points. Kick? Oh, we need 1 more viewer to rate on Kick. Okay, well, have a good night, guys, on Kick. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you for watching.